Session of the Senate. In the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Let us all rise for the prayer and put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Heavenly Father, we praise you, the Creator of all we see, hear, feel, and know, whose infinite wisdom we seek in all our endeavors, and whose light we seek in times of darkness. We acknowledge our faults and sins and pray for your forgiveness. We ask for your guidance that we may be free from the temptations that lead us astray from our path and purpose as public servants. May you continue to bless us with integrity and prudence as we craft the laws of our land. We hope that you would suffuse us with purpose as we go about our daily tasks to ensure that we will always be true to the Filipino people and not our personal interests. Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless our country and always watch over us. Let us carry out change according to your will. Let us never forget the poor, those bereft of hope, and those who seek justice. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings that you have given our country, rich in the blessings of nature, rich in the blessings of faith, rich in the blessings of love for our fellow human beings. May the Filipino people and the members of the Senate do only what is right and pleasing in your eyes. All this we ask to Christ our Lord. Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, De Leon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Zuberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 17 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 13th session, Tuesday, August 23, and consider the same as approved.
Was that the 13th
No,
or the
wait.
15th? Yeah.
Sorry, August 30, not 23.
The 15th session, Majority Leader?
Yes. 15th
Is there any objection? There is a motion to dispense with the reading of the journal of the 15th session, Tuesday, August 30, 2016. There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to acknowledge some guests in the Senate. We have the visitors from the Vietnamese Overseas Initiative for Conscience Empowerment, VOICE, headed by Attorney Trin Hu Long, a manager and legal. Also, guests of Senator Pacquiao, they will be competing in the IBF World Championships. Puerto Rican fighter Joe Arroyo. Their team is Antonio Otero, Alex Caraballo, Peter Rivera. The Philippine fighter is Jerwin Ancajas, and the team managers Mr. Jimenez and Francisco. And of course, Mr. President, to shed some beauty in the Senate, we'd like to recognize the guests of the Senate, Miss Philippines Earth 2016, Miss Imelda Bautista Schweighardt, and Miss Laurencio of Miss Philippines Earth.
Welcome to our guests, especially the guests of Senator Gatchalian, Miss Philippines Earth.
And Senator Gordon, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon.
Mr. President, I would just like to make offer a correction. It was during my time that Miss Earth rose from the earth and became international contest. Thank you very much.
That's why, Mr. President, I said they're the guests of the...
Congratulations to Senator Gordon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Senate Bill number 1113, an act requiring government agencies to indicate the blood type of individuals in the identification cards, certificates, and licenses. Senator Cynthia Villar.
Referred to the Committees on Health and Demography, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
1114, an act providing for a comprehensive malnutrition program and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, and Finance.
1115, an act granting the Magna Carta for daycare workers, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
Resolutions. Resolution number 115, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recently adopted scheme of requiring Filipino applicants for employment in the state of Kuwait to undergo medical examination conducted exclusively through Winston Q8 certification solutions as prerequisite for the grant of work visa by the Embassy of the State of Kuwait in the Philippines, which not only exposes overseas Filipino workers to arbitrary and exorbitant expenses, but also contravenes the provisions of the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 as amended, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and Foreign Relations.
Number 116, resolution honoring and commending the 10 outstanding teachers of 2016 awarded by the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated, Senator Paulo Benigno Tubama Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Rules.
Number 117, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Education, Arts, and Culture to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the state of internet connectivity in schools nationwide, Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Education, Arts, and Culture.
118, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the tax reform proposals of the Department of Finance with the ultimate goal of improving the country's tax collection effort while ensuring that the country's tax system is simpler, more equitable, and progressive, Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
119, directing the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported controversies involving the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office, with the end in view of reviewing its charter and making amendments thereto in order to promote integrity, transparency, and accountability in its operations and innovation in the delivery of its services. Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations and Government Corporations and Public Enterprises.
120, resolution honoring and commending the 2016 Metrobank Foundation's Search for Outstanding Teachers Awardees, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Rules.
121, resolution honoring and commending the 2016 Metrobank Foundation's Country's Outstanding Police Officers and Service Awardees, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Rules.
122, resolution honoring and commending the 2016 Metrobank Foundation's The Outstanding Philippine Soldiers Awardees, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to speak on a matter of personal privilege, may we recognize Senator Alan Cayetano?
Is there any objection? There being none, Senator Alan Peter Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
While they are
President.
preparing for the speech, Mr. President, I move that we suspend the session for a few minutes.
Senator Cayetano, is that okay?
With your permission, Mr. President, for a few minutes.
Session is suspended.
President wants to use the mic. The DBM said they will give an amendment. I think it's for the budget or for also for this. Most likely, for sure, we're going to do it. What I did was I put the specific segment. I'll show you the
Sani, naka-email mo sa iyo. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. Senator Cayetano is recognized.
Sir President, I rise on a question of personal and collective privilege, and with the permission of the Senate President and our colleagues, I ask permission to use the projector and some slides.
Go ahead, sir.
Sir President, may I start with a quote from Proverbs 29, verse 1 and 2. He who is often rebuked and hardened his neck will suddenly be destroyed and without remedy. Yung pong pinagsabihan na, pero napakatigas ng ulo at ayaw magbago, ay gigibain at wala nang magagawa. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked bears rule, the people mourn. Sir President, just like all of our colleagues here, we are human. As politicians, we have our constituents, we have our experts, we have our staff. Can we go to the next slide? I had a secret weapon. The person in the picture is Pastor Doy Castillo. He was our pastor, a second father. The picture on the left was the picture after the sauna. Humabol siya sa dinner namin just to make sure that I was okay. At pinagpipilitan niya na mag-picture kami to show the other pastors in his group na okay lang ako. Kaya sabi ko sa kanya, Pastor, ano na lang, photobomber na lang ako to show that I fully support Senate President Aquilino Pimentel. Coco, it was a friendly fight and I'm ready to do my duties for the country. But a few days ago, sa kanan po, bigla siyang binawian ng buhay. And the relevance po of all of this is that he was so practical, but so idealistic, that when we had problems like extrajudicial killings versus drugs, corruption versus efficiency, natatakbuhan ko po siya at nakakausap. So today, I turn to you, my colleagues, and I turn to you, our people, for advice. Medyo po kasi full supporter ako nung drugs sa war, pero naapektuhan din po ako sa nababasa ko sa Time Magazine, sa South China Post, sa Facebook, sa mga pinapadala sa atin at sa mga upakan. At lalo po akong naapektuhan sa mga pulis na napatay at ang kanilang mga byuda ang napapanood po sa Senado ay yung mga pong pamilya ng mga nasa drugs ang nagte-testify dito. So, let me start with the facts in asking from some advice. And, Mr. President, my colleagues, allow me na parang kwentuhan lang ba? Na nasa isang sulok tayo, nag-uusap, at ito po ang aking pananaw sa nangyayari. Una po, sa akin, it's a fact that the drug menace is a national security threat and has destroyed millions of lives of Filipino families for the past decades. Wala pong isang presidente, wala pong isang politiko, isang administrasyon may kasalanan nito. Ito ay worldwide phenomenon ang droga. We have had people here like Senator Soto who has made it his main advocacy since he was vice mayor and many others here. No? The international and local drug syndicates have plagued the communities and threatened our personal security. Wala pong sense of security ang Pilipino dati. Pagka may kwintas, may cellphone, hindi mo pwede ilabas sa jeep, baka manakaw. Pagkakuha ng sweldo, hindi ka makadiretso sa paglabas at kukunin mo sweldo sa ATM, hindi pwede sa gabi, baka manakawang ka. Uwi ka ng gabi, baka bastusin ka, rapin ka, kukunin mo kotse mo, papatayin ka pa, no? We value the sanctity of life. We are a religious people, Mr. President. Christian, Muslims, whatever religion, importante ang buhay. Our war against illegal drugs is not a war against life, but a war to fight for the lives of all Filipinos. It is not a war against human rights, but a war to protect the human rights and to ensure the safety and welfare of the Filipino family. Mr. President, makikita mo sa susunod na slide, example lang to ng sipag ng ating Philippine media. No? Ito po ay isa sa Philippine Star na kung saan high sa shabu ng rape po ng 7 years old. No one in their normal state of mind, kahit na criminal po yung mind na yon, kahit malaswa yung kanyang isipan, ang mangre-rape po ng 7 years old. Next po, can we watch this short video from Action TV5?
Sumuko na ang suspect sa pagpatay sa isang nurse sa Quezon City noong Sabado. Bukod sa lasing, nagpositibo rin ang suspect sa pinagbabawal na gamot. Umaksyon si Renzo Pico.
Humingi po ako lahat po sa kamag-anak, sa magulang. Hindi ko po talaga intindihan na patayin po siya.
Napaiyak si Jeffrey Guarin nang iharap sa mga miyembro ng media sa Camp Karingal. Si Guarin ang sospek sa pagpatay sa 24 anyos na nurse na si September Paz sa Barangay Cristong Hari sa Quezon City. Sabado na matagpuan si Paz na may 19 na saksak sa katawan. Pero giit ni Guarin, hindi niya sinasadya ang nangyari.
Wala pa akong balak na patayin po siya. Balak ko lang po talaga po ang pera.
Lasing daw noon si Guarin at nabitin sa inuman, kaya naisipang magnakaw para magkaroon ng pambili ng alak. Pero nahuli siya ni Paz, kaya nasaksak ang biktima ni Guarin. Sa drug test naman na isinagawa sa suspect, positibo ang resulta. Sumuko na rin noon si Guarin sa Oplan tukhang ng QCPD, pero ayon sa suspect, matagal na siyang tumigil.
Ewan ko rin siya sir, mabiktima. Hindi lang siya nababalitaan.
Nakonsensya raw si Guarin sa pagpatay sa nurse, kaya kahapon, sumuko na siya sa kanilang barangay Kagawad. Maharap siya sa kasong murder. Ang mga kaanak naman ng biktima na nakaburol sa Sarat, Ilocos Norte, may mensahe sa mga tutol sa anti-drug campaign ng pamahalaan.
Lahat po ng mga politiko dyan na nagpoprotesta sa mga ginagawa ng mga nagpapatupad sa ating batas, mag-isip-isip naman kayo. Sana po hindi kayo mabiktima, kagaya namin.
Umaaksyon Renz Ongkiko, News 5.
Mr. President, if you look at the next slide, you will see that there was a 92% increase of number of recorded cases of rape from 2010 to 2014, and 200% increase on violations of the anti-violence against women and children. And to be fair to the past administration, if you go back, Arroyo administration, Estrada administration, Ramos administration, etc., patas ng patas eh. 40% yan dahil sa droga. Next slide. Even the Supreme Court, and I commend the Supreme Court, saw the problem, kaya po nag-create siya ng 240 additional trial courts nationwide to handle cases involving the Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002. Next slide. So the question is, Mr. President, tanong po natin sa bawat isa, how do we solve the problem? Pero po may bago tayong Pangulo. At siya po ang unang-unang dapat sumagot nito. So we ask ourselves, what is the Duterte administration policy? Let's view the President and let him answer it himself.
During my inauguration last 2016, I said that the fight against criminality and illegal drugs and corruption will be relentless and sustained. I reiterate that commitment today, and that is why I call on the Philippine National Police, the barangay chairman, the mayors and governors, are all those occupying seats of power and authority not to lower their guard. There will be no let up in this campaign. Double your efforts, triple them if need be. We will not stop until the last drug lord, the last financier, and the last pusher have surrendered or put behind bars. Or below the ground, if they so wish. To our police officers and other officials, do your job, and you will have the unwavering support of the Office of the President. I will be with you all the way. Abuse your authority, and there will be a hell to pay. For you will have become worse than criminality itself. I order the National Police Commission to hasten the conduct of investigation and adjudication of administrative cases against police officers involved in criminal activity and illegal activities.
Sir President, malinaw na ang policy ng President all out against drugs. Sabi niya, double, triple your effort, pero sinabi po niya, ikukulong lilitisin. Choice ng drug lord or nagbebenta kung gusto niya siyang buhay o patay. Bakit po? Pag lumaban siya at papatayin niya pulis, kung ikaw ba pulis, ibibigay mo buhay mo sa drug lord? Sa bansa, yes. Pero sa drug lord, hindi. Kaya marami nagsasabi at nababasa ko sa mga pahayagan, nakikita ko po sa telebisyon, sabi, si Mr. President naman, ang bukang bibig, patayin na lahat yan. Kill them all. Again, Mr. President, what is the Duterte administration's policy on drugs and criminality? Before I show you the next video, nagtanong po ako, and you can bear me out, Mr. President, Senate President Pimentel, dahil during the campaign, madalas ko marinig, yung mga drogista, pag ayaw tumigil, patayin. Sa amin kasi mga Tagalog, ang drogista is yung addict. Nung tinanong ko yung iba sa Davao, sabi, boss, yung iba kasi dito, ang pagkaintindi ng drogista, yung addict na nagbebenta. No? So yung pusher din. So ano ang policy ng ating Pangulo sa pusher at sa user? Can we view the next video? Can we dim the lights?
We will create an interagency committee on illegal drugs that will integrate efforts and strengthen the partnerships of all stakeholders. The reservists will be mobilized for information campaign against drug use and dissemination of information regarding drug rehabilitation program being offered by the government. Let us also strengthen our ROTC program to instill love of country and good citizenship. We will also prioritize the rehabilitation of drug users. We will increase the number of residential treatment and rehabilitation facilities in all regions of the country. The armed forces of the Philippines will facilitate the preparation for the use of military camps and facilities for drug rehabilitation.
Sir President, malinaw. Sa mga adik, ang gusto ng Presidente, rehabilitation. Nabasa nga natin sa dyaryo na si Mr. Ramon Ang ng San Miguel Corporation ay magbibigay nga ng 1 bilyon para nga po gumawa ng mga rehab center para walang gastos ang gobyerno. Ang balita ko po, ang mga TAN ng Mega World ay nakipag-meeting na rin at marami pang ibang negosyante sa DILG Secretary Sueño para kung saan-saan kampo ng pulis at PNP maglagay ng rehab centers. So yung pinapalabas, napapatayin lahat, malinaw na po na hindi nanggagaling sa ating Pangulo. So the next question, Mr. President, are we or are some people using the terms extrajudicial killings loosely? Not because they are human rights advocates, kasi we respect the human rights advocates. Kailangan natin sila. Pero yung iba, na drug lords na gustong siraan ng Pangulo o gustong tuloy ang kanilang negosyo, yung iba na politika na hindi matanggap na meron tayong Pangulo na katulad ni President Duterte, are they loosely using the word extrajudicial killing to discredit the PNP and the Duterte administration? Sa resolution pa lang po ng ating kasama na si Senator Leila de Lima, makikita niyo po, the recent rampant extrajudicial killings and summary killings of suspected criminals. I reviewed po, marami sa atin nilalagay ng alleged kasi iniimbestigahan mo pa lang eh. Pero sa kanya po, siya mag-chair, siya nangunguna sa hearing, pero hindi lang sa papel na to, pero sa maraming interview, hindi niya tatanggapin na hindi ito summary killing or extrajudicial killing. Next slide. This effort to discredit the President has reached the international news. In fact, dahil walang suporta dito sa ating bansa, of course, nire-report, kailangan gawin ng ating mga kapatid sa media, pero people feel safe eh. Nararamdaman ng taong pagbabago eh. Dati ang takot tao, ang hindi takot, kriminal. Ngayon ang kriminal takot, ang tao, ang mamamayan, hindi po takot. They feel safe, or at least they're beginning to feel safe. Kaya kung makikita nyo po yan, Time Magazine, yung pong South China Sea Post, grabe po ang mga article at pinapalabas po yung nangyayari sa ating bansa, parang Wild Wild West, parang kahit sino pwede patayin. Ang difference lang po dyan sa Huffington Post, kasi po yung isang nakatira doon sa ibang bansa, hindi na makapagpigil, ipinaliwanag niya na iba ang nangyayari sa Pilipinas at iba ang nire-report sa ibang bansa. Next slide. Tingnan po natin yung interview kagabi po sa ating pong kasamahan na si Senator De Lima.
The President and his supporters say that there just as many people were killed under the Arroyo and Aquino administrations. Is that true?
That is not true. If Senator Cayetano refers to both the Arroyo and Aquino administration, then we're looking at a period of more than 10 years. That's 9 years of Arroyo and 6 years of that.
The President and his supporters say that there just as many people were killed under the Arroyo and Aquino administrations. Is that true?
That is not true. If Senator Cayetano refers to both the Arroyo and Aquino administration, then we're looking at a period of more than 10 years. That's 9 years of Arroyo and 6 years of Aquino. And then we have 2 months of the Duterte administration, and there are a little over 2,000 already killed in the name of this war against drugs.
Let me play.
Mr. President, hindi po sana ako ma-offend na sinisiraan tayo internationally, or hindi ko sasabihin sana na minimislead ni Senator De Lima ang international community, ang publiko sa numero, kung hindi tayo nagkaroon ng hearing. Sa hearing po, hindi ko po pinagsama yung 9 years at 6 years. In-average ko po monthly. And Mr. President, narinig nyo sa sarili niyang bibig, sabi niya 2,000 na daw ang patay sa pangalan ng drug war. Bakit po? Kasi po lahat ng patay, sinasama po niya at charged to Duterte. Para bang sa isang restaurant po, na isa lang ang mesa ng Pangulo, pero lahat po nung nasa restaurant ay sumigaw ng Duterte, Duterte, kaya ibibigay yung resibo sa Presidente, siya na magbabayad sa lahat. Bakit po ganun? 2,000. Nireport naman po ng ating PNP kung ilan, less than 800 po at that time, ang patay because of legitimate PNP or law enforcement operation. Kung may tanong kung legitimate yung iba, that's fair. Pero po yung 2,000, so kahit sino na lang po napatay dahil may love triangle, patay po dahil away sa wedding, away sa utang, patay po dahil nagpustahan sa basketball, at ilagay lang po ng karatula, drug war, charge na po kay Duterte at sa drug war yan. Next slide, please. Tignan po natin para hindi tayo malito lahat. Sa bibig na po mismo ng dalawa pong nangunguna sa investigasyon na to, kung ano ba talaga ang definition ng extrajudicial killing. Kasi po baka tayo nagkakalituhan sa definition.
Importante nga po talaga na linawin kung ano yung sakop ng extrajudicial killings. At ang sigurong pwede nating paghugutan nito ay yung report ng Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings, si Philip Alston, nung siya ay bumisita dito. May 10 taon nang nakaraan. Ang sabi po ni Philip Alston sa kanyang report ay ang extrajudicial killing ay any killing by government forces as well as the killing by any other groups or individuals which the government failed to investigate, prosecute, and punish when it is in a position to do so.
Tama, Mr. President, sabi niya, hinugot niya kay Philip Alston yung kanyang definition. Talagang itong kaibigan natin na si Chairman Gascon may pinaghuhugutan talaga. Kaya talagang galit na galit sa ating Pangulo. The reality is there was neither the same number or even more. The reality, Mr. President, or ang katotohanan, there is the same number of murder or homicides or even less in a monthly average during the Arroyo Aquino and the Duterte time. Ulitin ko po, kung ang patay ngayon 2,000 sa isang buwan, 2 buwan, that's 1,000 a month, ganun din po nung panahon ni Presidente Aquino. 1,000 mahigit ang patay buwan-buwan. Pero dahil mas mabait magsalita ang ating dating Pangulo, mas politically correct, wala sa front page at wala po sa mga pahayagan around the world kung ilan ang patay. Pero ngayon po, lahat ng patay, para bang ang Pangulo natin may-ari ng lahat ng punerarya sa ating bansa, charge parati po lahat kay President Duterte. Let's look at the figures. Sir President, sa ibabaw galing sa PNP, 2010, 12,352 patay. Hindi po ordinary yan na patay po. Homicide at saka murder. 2013, at the peak, 16,160. Yan po ang source po niyan, PNP. Sa ibaba po, baka sabihin nyo, baka dinoktor ng PNP. PSA, sa Philippine Statistics Authority po, 2010, 12,622. 2013, 15,481. 2015, 12,478. May konting discrepancy pero magkakadikit. Siguro po, baka sa NSO natin makikita sa death certificate kung sakali kung ano ang pinaka-accurate. But what's my point, Mr. President? an average of 35 to 45 deaths a day. Ang kaibahan po, nung araw, ang napapatay, ang mga biktima ng drugista. Hindi lang po death, murder and homicide. Ang na-murder, ang napapatay by a crime, yung po mga inosente. Ngayon po, yung 700 sa legitimate PNP operations, ito po mga pusher. Yung sa labas po ng legitimate, hindi ko po alam. At tingin ko po, wala sa kwarto to makakaalam. Yung pumatay po ba dyan ay kapwa drug lord? Kasi baka magkumanta na at ayaw din magpahuli. Yung po ba ay love triangle? Yung po ba ay utang? Yung po ba ay sabog lang? Kaya nag-away? Next slide, please. Pero kung makikita nyo po, noong Aquino administration, naglabas po ng AO Order 35, Administrative Order 35. Dinefine po nila kung ano ang extrajudicial killing. Next slide po. Makikita nyo po na sinabi dito, for the purpose of the focused mandate of AO 35, killings related to common crimes and or the perpetration of their crimes shall be addressed by other appropriate mechanisms within the justice system. So to be convenient during the Aquino administration, pag ordinary crimes, pag droga, ay hindi kasama sa extrajudicial killings yan. Pero pagdating sa Duterte, kapag ka droga, kasama yan. Next slide. Ayan po mismo, sa kanilang sariling definition. The victims were members of affiliated with an organization to include political, environmental, agrarian, labor, similar cases, an advocate of the above, media practitioner. In other words, Mr. President, ikaw po ay member ng cause-oriented group. Aktivista ka against coal, against mining, aktivista ka na journalist, investigative journalist ka, no? Pag may nangyari sa'yo at napatay ka, diyan ka babaksak. But let me ask our journalists today, let me ask our labor activists, our environmental activists, don't you feel safer today than 6 years ago? Next slide. Yan po ang pinapakita ng Aquino administration or ni Senator De Lima abroad. Sa report nila na total 394 lang ang extrajudicial killing sa panahon nila. Bakit po? Iniba nila yung definition eh. Pag sila naglaro, ang gusto nila rules ng volleyball. Pag tayo naglaro, rules ng basketball. Tapos, banat ng banat. Ang problema, Mr. President, mga kababayan, our colleagues, kung ang Pangulo lang po ang nasisira, I let him speak for himself. Ang problema po, isa tayo sa kulelat pagdating sa turismo eh. Nagwo-work hard ang Department of Tourism, nagwo-work hard po ang iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno, dumami ang turista, tapos palalabasin po natin sa ibang bansa na hindi safe sa atin, na grabe ang patayan. Samantalang ang mga OFWs mismo nagsasabi na mas safe na ngayon ang kanilang pamilya. So I have a question to Mr. Gascon, Chairman Gascon. Why are you destroying the image of the Philippines? Why are you inviting trade sanctions from the EU? Hindi po ako anti-Aquino. Hindi po ako galit sa dilaw as a general rule. Some of my best friends are members of the Liberal Party. My seatmates are members of the Liberal Party. We've worked together in important bills. We recognize the contribution of President Benigno, or Pinoy, as he wants to be called, on our economy. But Mr. Gascon, nagagawa mo naman trabaho mo dito, i-involve mo pa EU, European Union. Ano po sabi niya? The GSP Plus system is anchored and based almost fully and significantly in compliance with certain international standards. Human rights standards, labor standards, and environmental standards. Question, Mr. Gascon. Sa environment muna, yung mga power plant, lalo yung coal, yung mga minahan, hindi ba mas mahigpit ngayon sa Duterte administration? To the point na yung mga kapitalista, ang mga may-ari ng kumpanya, ay nagsasabi na nga na ridiculous na, masyado na mahigpit, mas mahigpit pa sa pinakamahigpit na world standard. So, sa environmental, better tayo. Labor standards, nag-hearing na kaagad si Senator Joel Villanueva pagdating sa contractualization sa ENDO. Ang civil service po, nagsalita na kahapon sa contractualization sa gobyerno. Ang ating pong Pangulo, At atin Labor Secretary Bello, kumilos kaagad. So 2 out of 3, labor, environmental, wag mo naman sabihin hindi tayo mas magaling. So dapat siguro, sinabi ni Mr. Gascon, EU, increase trade with the Philippines. Pero anong pinukol niya po? Human rights standards. Now, let me now test whether tama o mali yung sinabi po ni Mr. Gascon. Next slide. Ito po, extrajudicial killings remains biggest rights problem under Aquino. It's the U.S. report. But I did not blame President Aquino. I supported him. Hindi madali to get rid of extrajudicial killings, killings ng media. Di ba? Next slide. Interagency body, Human Rights Watch, said the same thing. I did not criticize President Aquino. I supported him because I saw he was moving in the judiciary, in the DOJ, etc., to address all of this. Si Mr. Gascon ba nagsalita nung panahon na yan? Sinabi ba niya, EU, pigilan nyo yung ibang trade with President Aquino. O, yung upgrade, wag muna kasi may problema sa human rights. Hindi po, tahimik siya nun. Pero Mr. President, ano po ba talaga ang nakalagay sa International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights? Ito po nakalagay. Every human being has the inherent right to life. May karapatan po mabuhay ang bawat tao. The right shall be protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. Underlined, arbitrarily. Bakit po? Next slide. Ito po ang dinidiscuss po ng mga experts on human rights at ipropropose po nila dito sa convention na yung definition ng arbitrary. Although it inheres in every human being by virtue of membership in the human family, the right to life is not absolute. By requiring the deprivations of life must not be arbitrary in nature. Article 6, paragraph 1 implicitly recognizes that some deprivations of life may be justified in some cases. Minsan po may dahilan kung bakit kukunin ang isang buhay. Ano po yung example? Use of lethal force against a person who poses an immediate threat to the lives of others when no other less harmful means of protection are or could have been available does not prima facie constitute an arbitrary deprivation of life. Ibig sabihin po, police, na makikipagbarilan po sa isang drug lord. Mamimili siya buhay niya o buhay ng drug lord. Siyempre, pipiliin niya buhay niya. At yan po ay hindi violation ng Article 6 Right of Life sa International Convention. Next slide. Sir President, I also want to take note of this because this will be discussed, I think, next month in the conventions, and this has been ito po ay diniscuss for the last, is it 10 or 20 years. All human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interrelated. Ibig sabihin po, puti ka man, itim, kayo manggi, ikaw po man ay in-check, Hapon, Pilipino, Amerikano, may karapatan ka sa buhay. Ngunit, the international community must treat human rights globally in a fair and equal manner, on the same footing, and with the same emphasis. While the significance of national and regional particularities and various historical, cultural, and religious backgrounds must be borne in mind. It is the duty of the states, regardless of their political, economic, and cultural systems, to promote and protect all human rights and fundamental freedoms. Ang parati pong nagbabanggit niyan, Singapore. Singapore po, grabe po ang peace and order. Grabe po ang katahimikan sa droga. Pero parati silang tinutulig sa human rights. Pero sabi po nila, we're Asians. Iba kultura namin. Kasi po sa ibang bansa, sa ibang mundo, recreational yung ibang drugs eh. Iba din ang droga na gamit nila. I won't go into that discussion right now, Mr. President. Ang ibig ko lang po sabihin, wag naman tayo husgahan ng ibang bansa sa kanilang kultura. Kasi meron tayong sarili nating kultura, sarili nating paniniwala. Ngunit kasama sa ating paniniwala, the sanctity of life. Next slide. Dati po, ang tao ang takot. Ang kriminal hindi. Dati po, ang kriminal may barel kahit saan pwede pumasok, kahit saan pwede pumunta. Ang tao, hindi pwede sa madilim, sa gabi, ingat, pag nakasakay ng jeep, Pag nagko-commute, tago yung mga valuables. Ngayon po, nagbago na. Ang mga kriminal ang takot, and people are beginning to feel safe. Next slide. Why are we accusing the Duterte administration for being responsible for extrajudicial killings? Si Duterte ba't ang kanyang administrasyon ang may kasalanan sa lahat ng patayan? First point, there is equal number, if not less, na patay ngayon. Next slide. Let us ask the two again kung sino ang nasisisi.
Human rights defenders and environmentalists, his definition actually covers the scenario that we are currently facing as well. The key component is that we should show that the state is doing everything it can to prevent this phenomenon from becoming a practice.
Okay, 2 points, Mr. President. Unang-una, bago nagsalita si Chairman Gascon noon, lahat ng witness ay nagsabi na ang kanilang kaso ay iniimbestigahan. In fact, yung unang witness, kinasuhan na ng murder ang 2 pulis. So sa sariling definition ni Mr. Gascon, failed to investigate, prosecute, and punish. Paano na-fail? Iniimbestigahan na nga ng CHR. Iniimbestigahan na nga ng pulis. Facing murder na nga at iniimbestigahan ng Senado. Pero ano sabi ni Mr. Gascon? Kasama daw sa definisyon yung nangyayari ngayon. Failed to prosecute and punish. Mr. Gascon, and to our colleagues, malabo naman ata yun. Ang kinote nila, ayan, no, extrajudicial killing is any killing by government forces as well as the killing by any other groups or individual which the government failed to investigate, prosecute, and punish. Hindi po yan nangyayari ngayon. Next slide, please. Pakinggan po natin ang ating Pangulo. Ano ang kanyang policy pagdating po sa pag-iimbestiga at pang-aabuso po ng pulis?
To our police officers and other officials, do your job, and you will have the unwavering support of the Office of the President. I will be with you all the way. Abuse your authority, and there will be a hell to pay. For you will have become worse than criminality itself. I order the National Police Commission to hasten the conduct of investigation and adjudication of administrative cases against police officers involved in criminal activity and illegal activities, and prescribe policies on lifestyle checks for PNP members. In this quest, I will put at stake my honor, my life, and the presidency itself. The DLG is also directed to strictly monitor how LGUs perform their supervision functions over the police, and those found that performing will be sanctioned, including the loss of police deputation from the NAPOLCOM. Let me repeat my warning to all. I repeat, my repeat to all. Do not do drugs. Because you will be the solution to the drug crisis that has engulfed malawak the nation.
Mr. President, malinaw. Sabi ng Pangulo, monitor, LGU, PNP. Ang LGU hindi kasama po ng PNP yan, pwede magsumbong. Sinabi po niya sa mga pulis, hindi pwedeng may abuso. Sinabi niya, he will stake his honor. Hindi lang sa mga lalabanan sa droga, pati yung umabuso ng mga pulis. Because the President is not only anti-drugs, he is for law and order. In fact, earlier on, the PNP issued a memorandum saying na yung mga vigilante killings ay hindi nila pinapayagan at lahat ng report of vigilante killings kailangan 7 days meron pong investigasyon at report. So, Mr. Gascon, saan yung sinasabi mong hindi pinapansin, hindi iniimbestigahan, hindi pinoprosecute? Next. Even the Supreme Court, dahil nabahala na rin sila at marami tayong kagalang-galang na mga justices, na mga human rights advocates, nagpapasalamat kami sa kanila sa kanilang pag-form ng human rights violation ng isang body to look into human rights violations. Bakit po? Next slide. Because under the Alston definition, the Lima and Gascon's definition, the question has to be asked, are these deaths extrajudicial killings? Next slide. The answer is a big no. And that's why we thank the Supreme Court because they are part of the state. Pag sinabi ni Mr. Gascon, Chairman Gascon, Chairperson Gascon, at sinabi ni Senator De Lima that the state is not investigating, prosecuting, kasama tayo doon, Mr. President. Duterte is not the state. The presidency is not the state. We are a presidential form of government. There are checks and balances. Pag may problema yung executive, nandyan yung legislative, nandyan yung judiciary. Kaya nga may impeachment eh. Kaya nga merong kasuhan, may prosecution, kaya nga may ombudsman. Ayan po. The state includes all of us. Executive, legislative, judiciary, CHR, kasama po yan. Next slide. There is no national outrage regarding the drug war. Bakit po? Eh, alam naman po na ang tinatarget po talaga ang nagbebenta ng droga eh. Hindi naman tinatarget ang inosente at alam naman po na yung mga sumurrender are treated humanely. But there is an international effort to discredit the Duterte administration. Makikita niyo po ang statement ni Senator De Lima. Killings may lead to charges of crimes against humanity. Ang bigat naman. Isasama mo si Duterte, crimes against humanity. Yung mga kinakasuhan dyan, mga madmen eh. Mga kinakasuhan dyan, genocide. Pero ganyan po ang statement niya while she is chairing a hearing and saying that she can be neutral. How can you be neutral, Mr. President, pag yan na sinabi mo? Pero Mr. President, tanong muna, why are we involving the ICC in the drug war in the Philippines? International Criminal Court. Gusto nyo ba na ang Pangulo mahati ang atensyon? Kaso niya abroad at yung drug na problema dito? Gusto ba natin itigil ang laban sa droga? But a second question, Mr. President. Kasi akala nung iba, ang ICC, parang MTC, RTC, CA, Supreme Court, Sandigan Bayan. Hindi po. Tignan po natin ang rules ng international ng ICC. The case is being investigated or prosecuted by a state which has jurisdiction over it unless the state is unwilling or unable to genuinely carry out the investigation or prosecution. Rome Statute Article 7-A, issue of admissibility. Alam po ng lahat ng abogado, pag hindi admissible, hindi tatanggapin, part ng jurisdiction po. Eh sinabi na po sa rules mismo ng ICC, kapag yung estado na yon ay pinaparusahan po niya ang extrajudicial killing sa kanyang bansa, hindi mo pwedeng dalhin sa ICC because it is not state-sponsored. Eh, ang pinapalabas ng marami dito, state-sponsored ang ginagawa po na extrajudicial killings. Or that all of these are extrajudicial killings. Do you want to try the president in the International Criminal Court? Next slide, please. But let's remember that not all alleged extrajudicial killings cases are admissible in the ICC because, next slide, the case has been investigated by a state which has jurisdiction over it, and the state has decided not to prosecute the person concerned unless the decision resulted from the unwillingness or inability of the state to genuinely prosecute. Article 17B, issue of admissibility. Eh dapat nga dito yung Estado mismo nagsabi, ayoko i-prosecute yan. Eh dito nga, pino-prosecute natin eh. At pinakita natin, kumikilos ang DILG, kumikilos ang PNP, eh ang Senado kumikilos eh. Mas marami pang ang hearing yon. Kaso sa iba pang mga hearing sa ibang committee. Do we disregard, Mr. President, do we disregard human rights? What is the Duterte administration policy on human rights? Again, Mr. President, let's hear the President. Let's hear it from his mouth.
My administration shall implement a human approach to development and governance as we improve our people's welfare in the areas of health, education, adequate food and housing, environmental preservation, and respect for culture. Human rights must work to uplift human dignity. But human rights cannot be used as a shield or an excuse to destroy the country. Your country, I am my country.
Sir President, narinig po natin sa sariling bibig ng ating Pangulo na ang human rights ay importante sa ating bansa. Pero hindi pwedeng gamitin yung human rights para hindi ituloy ang drug war. Hindi rin pwedeng abusuhin ang human rights. But let me play the advocate. Total, humingi ako ng advice sa inyo at sa ating mga kababayan. Pero sabihin nyo, Sir President, Kuya Alan, narinig ko sinabi ng Pangulo yan human rights na yan, wala yan. Well, let me ask you, sino sa atin ang hindi nakarinig sa teacher natin, sa boss natin, I will accept no excuses. Today's exam or today's requirement, no excuses. Kung namatayan ka sa pamilya mo, kung nasa ospital ka, at lumapit ka sa teacher mo at sabihin mo, Ma'am, pasensya na, alam ko no excuses, pero kadextrose po ako, unconscious ako, hindi ako makapunta. Hindi ba tatanggapin yung excuse na yon? In other words, it is a hyperbole or it is a manner of speaking. If you look at all of the speeches, especially the policy speeches of the President, parating niyang sinabi, we will operate within the confines of the Philippine Constitution. We will respect the Bill of Rights, the rule of law. In fact, ang hinahanap lang ng ating Pangulo, yung nangyayari sa Singapore. People love the law, but people fear the law. People know that the law will protect them, but people know that they have to follow the law. Ang hinahanap lang ng Pangulo natin, mayaman, mahirap, kriminal, hindi, Bisaya, Ilocano, Ilonggo, Kapampangan, kung anuman ang pagkakaiba natin, lalaki, babae, LGBT, may isang batas, hindi nagdi-discriminate, at sinusunod natin lahat. Hindi katulad ng nangyayari dati, pag drug lord ka. You're above the law. No? And there's only one Lord. There shouldn't be drug lords. Mr. President, in ending my conversation with the people and with you, I have an appeal. Pag-isipan natin na mabuti kung dapat ang nag-chair ng isang committee sa hearing, I'm not questioning the chairmanship of the Committee on Human Rights and Justice and Human Rights. Pero sa hearing na yon, kung ikaw ay advocate, kung ikaw ay decided na, paano mo mabibigyan ng tsansa yung kabilang side? Nakita nyo po yung pinilang witness panay pamilya po ng mga napatayan na nasa droga. Hindi naman po pinila yung mga witnesses ng mga pamilya naman ng mga pulis na napatayan. Nakita naman po natin na kapag ang PNP ang magsasalita, may time limit. Pero pag ang magsasalita po ay yung pamilya ng mga nagbebenta ng droga, walang time limit. Nakita po natin sa mga interview. Mr. President, Senator Gordon here was chairman of the Blue Ribbon Committee. I was chairman of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Many here chaired committees in aid of legislation. But when we are the chairman, we are neutral. We can make certain statements, but we are the judges. So we allow the others to either defend or prosecute, in a manner of speaking, to be the advocate. So that's the first question I want to throw to the body. No? Paano po mangyayari na sa isip po ng chairman or ni Senator De Lima, guilty na po ang administrasyon? Paano mabibigyan ng fair na hearing ito? Pangalawa po, kahit sabihin po natin legislative, fact-finding to no? Pangalawa po, ang balita ko po, nag-schedule ng hearing ng September 5. Ano po ba ang ating adhikain dito? Na malaman ang totoo, maprotektahan ang karapatang pantao, human rights, o mapahiya ang Pangulo? Tanungin niyo po sa kahit anong diplomat. Tanungin niyo po sa kahit anong bansa. Kapag may international conference, lalo na po kapag ka po head of states ang magkikita-kita, o kahit na state visit po, ang mga oposisyon sa isang bansa ay nananahimik muna dahil hindi po sila oposisyon sa kanilang sariling bansa. Oposisyon sila sa administrasyon. Tignan niyo po ako, first 3 years, 2010 to 2013, minority leader po ako dito. Paminsan-minsan po tinutuligsa ko si President Aquino. Pero pag may state visit po siya, either tahimik na lang muna ako o pinupuri ko. Bakit? Because he's representing the country. So meron po tayong international gathering. Heads of state ang kasama ng Pangulo next week. Tapos sasabayan natin ang hearing na ganito at pipilahan yun ng witnesses ng mga kamag-anak ng pushers. Of course, may karapatan din sila. And of course, we have to hear them. But Mr. President, isasabay natin na sa dyaryo mukhang meron pong meeting si President Obama at ating Pangulo. He'll be meeting other prime ministers and other presidents. And then tayo mag-hearing dito. And we'll make it appear that this is a Duterte orchestrated madman type of killing everyone, killing all involved in drugs in our country. I know in the Senate, the chairperson is king or queen, depending on if he is male or female. But Mr. President, shouldn't we have ground rules? Hindi ba tao din naman tayong lahat? Pilipino din naman tayong lahat eh. Hindi ba pwedeng hintayin niyo muna ang Pangulo bago kayo mag-speech? Nung nakita ko po na wala si Senator De Lima ngayon, inisip ko po na wag muna mag-speech. Ang problema po, Wednesday ngayon, bukas Thursday, tapos next week na po yung pagpunta ng Presidente. And anytime naman po, pwede naman kami siya mag-speech at sasagot ako. But the point, Mr. President, kahit wala siya, wala ako, we're only senators. We represent our people here in the Senate, but we do not represent our people and our country outside of the country in an official manner. We are representatives of the people, but we are not the representative. And in attending the international conference next week, the President will be representing our OFWs, our trade agreements, our pitches for tourism, will be representing our needs to the other countries, the needed funding for infrastructure. Our President will be representing the opposition and the administration all together. So, Mr. President, can't we be united when the President represents not his administration, but when he represents the whole country? Sir President, I'm not saying patayin natin ang hearing na to. Di ko po sinasabing wag bantayan. In fact, Mr. President, baka nga kailangan may permanent tayong committee just to monitor human rights, no, in the Senate. I will agree to that. But having said that, Mr. President, ayusin naman po natin na yung sumisigaw na human rights, gawin din niya. And this is my final point. Ano po ba pinaka-basic sa human rights? Hindi ba due process? Hindi ba si Eva at Adan, alam naman ng Diyos na kinain nila yung mansanas, pero sabi po ng Diyos sa kanila, Eva, Adan, ba't kayo nagtatago? Nagtanong muna ang Diyos eh. Pero alam niya na guilty. Pero yun po ang example parate sa law school ng due process. Tinanong muna. Bakit po? O edi nagturuan na, sabi ni Adan, si Eva po nagbigay sa akin eh. Sabi naman ni Eva, ang ahas nagbigay sa akin, nakapagpaliwanag po sila. Pero may due process. Tayo po, naghihiring pa lang, sinasabi na ni Chairman Gascon at ni Senator De Lima. Lastly po, sabi po ni Chairman Gascon, ang pangalan ng team nila na nag-iimbestiga sa mga pulis ay Team Rob Out. I think it was Senator Lacson, if I'm not mistaken, who pointed that out, and rightly so. And I thank Senator Lacson. Sipin mo naman po, pulis ka, kakatanggap ka ng sulat, kailangan ka ma-interview ng Team Rob Out. Wala ka pang ginagawa, guilty ka na. Team Rob Out, yun po ang pangalan. Taga-human rights kayo. Kung ang pulis siguro o kami dito sa Senado na hindi expert sa human rights ang magkamali, okay lang. Pero kayo sa human rights, yan ang trabaho nyo. Mr. President, hindi naman trabaho ng human rights lang isumbong ang violation sa human rights. Ang trabaho din ng human rights is to represent us to the world that in our country, Filipinos respect human rights. If there are violations, tell me what country ang walang human rights violation. Anong bansa? Simula nung kay Cain and Abel at pinatay yung kapatid, meron ng human rights violation eh. Wala namang bansa po na walang human rights violation. Ang question po, may ginagawa ba tayo? Wala. Panuorin nyo po ang interviews nila sa CNN, interviews po, pati sa BBC po at sa iba. Pinalalabas wala tayong ginagawa, which I take exception to. Sir President, medyo humaba ang aking speech, pero ako'y nagpapasalamat sa inyong lahat. Ako humingi ng patnubay din. Alam ko lahat tayo gusto din magsalita sa issue na to. Pero let us act as one in the Senate in deciding certain important facts, including how do we help the police? How do we add their equipment? Paano natin pataasin ang sweldo nila? Pati ang bumbero, ang jail guards, pati po ang ating pong mga militar. Let us act together in saying, kailangan lahat ng hearing dito sa Senado fair. At lahat po ng chairman, walang bias. Although mahirap po mag-judge. Talagang pag inumpisahan natin, baka isa-isay na natin, mahirap naman po. But Mr. President, may I repeat my appeal. Baka naman pwedeng may gentleman's and gentlewoman's agreement tayo dito. Pag ang presidente nasa abroad at representing all of us, di ba? Let's take care of other matters muna. Pagbalik, tuloy ang ligaya, upakan ulit. That's democracy, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. God bless you. God bless us all.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I wish to interpolate the gentleman from Taguig, but before that, Senator Cynthia Villar would like to have the floor for a manifestation concerning the speech of the gentleman.
Okay, so Senator Villar is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make a manifestation on the mentioned GSP Plus. The GSP Plus is an action by the European Union giving us free tariff or lifting the tariff on 6,000 products of the Philippines being exported to the European Union. It came after the European Union lifted our yellow tag. Yung yellow tag po natin ay kung hindi tayo maipapasa yung ating amendment to the Fisheries Code that we allow illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in the Philippines. Kasi po, pag nag-red tag tayo after the yellow tag, they will ban all the fisheries export to Europe, which amounts to 9 billion pesos. So, nung last year po, ipinasa po ng Senado yung ating amendment to the Fisheries Code of 1998 na pinahigpit po para mapigil ang illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. After that, the yellow tag was removed, and then they gave us the GSP Plus, which lifted the tariff on our 6,000 products na export to Europe. So, hindi ko po maisip na they will connect the GSP Plus to human rights violation. So, yun lang po ang gusto kong i-manifest, at I want to thank the Senate of the Philippines in the 16th Congress for passing the amendment to the Fisheries Code of 1998. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Villar, for that additional information. Senator Soto is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished gentleman from Taguig yield to a few questions, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, it will be a privilege to answer questions from our Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the gentleman for the well-prepared privilege speech. And I must admit that I have admiration for the gentleman for every time he opens up with a privilege speech, he opens up with a passage from the Bible. And I was reminded earlier of the passages mentioned by Senator Manny Pacquiao, Romans 13, and chapter 1 to 5, no, verses 1 to 5, and then Acts 25, verses 10 to 11. Let me just add mine for the perusal of the gentleman from Taguig. Luke 19:27, and if you're familiar with that, it says, "But those enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me." Baka pwede mong idagdag ito sa mga nagagamit ninyo. Thank you for that. Now,
Thank you, Reverend Senator Tito Soto.
Thank you. I said well-crafted and then congratulations because I like the tagline above your presentation. You said there, no to drugs, yes to peace and order. Excellent. Because nationwide, I've been traveling and every now and then I see these logos or these lines. They said, yes to God, no to drugs. You should not do that. Never should you use that. Because you cannot compare drugs to God. We should never compare drugs to God. Therefore, ito maganda, yung ginamit ni Senator Cayetano. No to drugs, yes to peace and order. So, congratulations for that, Mr. President. Now, going to my first question. Extrajudicial killings. There have been definitions during the public hearings of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights about the definition of extrajudicial killings. Iba-iba ho ang interpretasyon. Iba-iba ang ano, no? May I ask you your opinion on the Odicta assassination? Are you familiar with the Melvin Odicta and Mrs. Odicta assassination in Iloilo? Or from Iloilo, but assassinated somewhere in
Mr. President, may I first thank you for the congratulations, and I use the verses to give glory to God, but also because whether we quote from the Bible, the Quran, or any holy book, as we believe in different religions, we believe in the principle, kaya natin kino-quote yan. And I thank you for the verse that you quoted. If you are mentioning, Mr. President, the case of the alleged drug lords who went to the DILG secretary, and then when they left, they rode a ferry, and as they were leaving the ferry, or
a few days after,
they were assassinated.
So, is that again charged to President Duterte? Is that extrajudicial killings?
If you will listen to Senator De Lima and to Chairman Gascon in general, all of that will be charged to him. Because their definition of extrajudicial killing, and listening to them when they name the numbers 2,000, kahit sinong mapatay na has anything to do with criminality. Let me put it this way, Senator Soto, our dear Majority Leader, Mr. President. In layman's speaking, extrajudicial, ano ba ibig sabihin ng extrajudicial? Labas sa korte. So any killing, not of natural death, na hindi in order ng korte, is extrajudicial killing. Ang problema sa human rights advocates at sa abroad, pag sinabi mong extrajudicial killing, ang impression nun, pinapayagan ng Estado. So if you ask me, are all of these shootouts, yung mga pinatay, drug lord to drug lord, in the generic sense, extrajudicial siya. But in the human rights definition, as Chairman Gascon quoted Philip Alston, hindi siya kasama kasi iniimbestigahan at kinakasuhan to. Meaning, ang pinag-uusapan po dito, state-sponsored ba yung extrajudicial killing o hindi? No? So, Mr. President, I do not believe that it's the DILG, the President, or the PNP who ordered them killed. What is a possible scenario? Ano ba ho nangyayari pag ang isang drug lord ay nagsumbong po sa police or sa DILG? Takot ang mga kasama niya na sila naman ang ikanta. This is usual in organized crime, Mr. President. Hindi ba yung sa mafia, no? So kung yung godfather ang pinakamataas, may consigliere yung kanyang overall advisor, yung bawat batalyon niya, merong capo regime. Pag nahuli mo yung singtaas ng capo regime, kaya na niyang isumbong yung godfather. So pag yung capo regime ay nag-report na sa DOJ nila or sa Attorney General, itinatago na yan. Bakit? Kung hindi, ang papatay sa kanila, hindi yung Estado. Ang papatay sa kanila, yung organisasyon. That's why, to my information, maraming susurrender ngayon for two purposes. Number one, to tell the police, we will cooperate. Huwag nyo kaming pagka kayo, halimbawa po yung iba sinabi, hindi nyo na kailangan ng warrant, pasukin yung bahay namin. Kasi takot ng ekwentro eh. But number two, to also plea for their safety. Kasi pag kwinento na nila, saan nila kinukuha supply, sino kasama nila, etc., yun ang mapapatay. And a good example here, Senator Soto, and I'm sure you gave this example a lot of times when you were still Vice Mayor and head of the anti-drugs sa Quezon City, no? Hindi ba yung police, kung may ginagamit yan na pusher, pag nahuli yung pusher, siya mag-asikaso, makawala. Kasi kung hindi, kakanta siya eh. Pero kung ngayon, nakuha yung pusher, sumurrender, say, boss, wag niyo ako patayin. Sasabihin ko sa inyo kung sino protector ko, sino supplier ko, sino nagre-recycle. Eh, patay na yung police. So, minsan, yung police na madumi, siya na ang papatay mismo sa kanyang supplier or drug lord to drug lord. But that is not an act of the state. That is an act of a rogue policeman or of a rotten egg. Yung pong sinasabi ko na bakit si Chairman Gascon at si Senator De Lima, ganyan ang faulty generalization. Nung DOJ pa ho, si Senator De Lima, pag may isang piskal po na tumanggap ng lagay, ibig ba sabihin ang buong DOJ po ay tumatanggap ng lagay? Ibig ba sabihin ang secretary tumatanggap ng lagay? Hindi po. Hindi naman po yung charge to Secretary De Lima. Bakit po ito? Charge to Duterte po lahat.
Yes, Mr. President, I will have to agree to most of what you said now. Yun namang sinasabi ninyong nagre-report. The report on the ground is different. Ang sinasabi po sa atin yan, and I speak as still the president of the Philippine Narcotic Enforcement Officers Association. No? I have been the leader of that group since our Inoa days. Nagre-report, susurrender, pagbalik, tira uli. Parang nagre-report lang para to lift the pressure.
I agree, Mr. President. Meron din pong ganun.
Oo, pero pagbalik, tira din eh. So really, this is a very difficult situation for the government, especially the Duterte administration that is really seriously bent on curtailing totally the drug problem, the drug menace. Now, I will have to offer a disclosure, no, because my next question is about the CHR. And my disclosure is that I've had 2 tiffs with that CHR already. Once when I was Vice Mayor, second when I was Chairman of the Dangerous Drugs Board. My first tiff was when I was proposing in Quezon City a mandatory drug testing. Ewan ko kung bakit ayaw na CHR ng mandatory drug testing, kinestyon nila yun eh. Oo, nung araw, talagang antindi ng problema ko noon sa kanila. And then, pagdating ho ng Dangerous Drugs Board Chairman ako, and we already incorporated in the law that there is mandatory drug testing, kine-question na naman. As a matter of fact, they question the mandatory drug testing for students, saka sa mga, naiintindihan ko yung sa mga students, pero sa workplace, bakit may questionin mo yun?
Well, Mr. President, if I may venture just a short comment or answer to that. Kasi po, yung evolution po ng human rights sa Europeans, yung values nila sa West ang ini-impose sa atin So, sumobra na rin po kasi yung kanilang individual rights at right to privacy. So, sa kanila, pagka hindi random, it's a violation of our rights. Pero sa atin po na Asians, na pamilya, na pag sinabi ng head ng family, sino nag-drug sa inyo, lahat kayo magpa-testing, it's within our culture So, it doesn't violate individual rights, especially in the context of certain circumstances. For example, Mr. President, paano magiging violation pag pulis ka at mandatory? Pulis ka Kung sasabihin mo, buong Pilipinas fishing expedition lahat, baka pwede mo sabihin, it's not a question of Western or Asian values, di ba? Pero halimbawa, sasabihin mo, Mr. President, militar at saka pulis. Hindi ba pwede magkaroon doon na hindi random kung hindi mandatory? Paano ka naman kampante sa pulis at saka sa militar or kahit sa politiko kung hindi mo alam na drug-free yung tao? So I commiserate, Mr. President, and I understand your frustrations. You were trying to address a problem in your city and you were trying to uphold the rights of innocent people, but the Commission on Human Rights in that case was a stumbling block rather than a organization that could help you find solutions to solve the problem.
Parang ang dating po sa akin human rights daw yung magdurog. Parang ganun ang dating sa akin na huwag kong pakikialaman kung gusto magdurog nila dahil human right nila yon. Okay lang yun kung siya lang mag-isa. Kaso, tignan nyo kung ilang libo ang napatay na rape ng mga user at na mga gumagamit ng droga. Ilan ang naapektuhan nila? Ilang buhay, ilang pamilya nasira nila? So, paano yun? Still, human rights nila yung magdurog?
To your point, Mr. President, okay lang sabihin mo kung private sila lang, sila may sariling negosyo, walang maapektuhan. Pero paano kung teacher siya at ang ina-handle po niya may mga bata? Paano po kung police siya? Women's desk, ang ina-handle po niya mga na-abuso or victims against violence against women and children, di ba? Tapos durog sila. Wala tayong karapatan na siguraduhin na ang mga naglilingkod sa bayan ay drug-free. I again agree with you, Mr. President.
Incidentally, Mr. President, there are thousands of crimes committed by persons under the influence of drugs. Were they investigated by the CHR?
Wala,
your knowledge?
Wala po akong knowledge as of now, pero at least po sa public pronouncements, parang ang focus nila parate kapag law enforcers or alagad ng batas or state actors ang kumilos, doon nila pinapasok na human rights. Except for yung sa SAF 44, I think, that they investigated, hindi masyadong na-highlight kung iniimbestigahan nila yung violations of, halimbawa po, sa mga polis ngayon na napatay, yung violation ng kanilang karapatan na pinatay sila ng mga drug lords.
So the 7-year-old girl that was raped and killed by a marijuana addict, high on marijuana, okay lang sa CHR yan?
No knowledge as of now. I'm sure po na hindi okay sa kanila, but I do not know if it is...
I mean, investigation-wise, no? I don't mean okay sa kanila na pwede yun. I don't mean that.
Tama po.
What I mean is baka hindi kailangan imbestigahan. Hindi sila kailangan mag-step in. Ganun po ba?
Ang akin pong impression, but I may be wrong, Mr. President, is parang hindi nila sakop yon kasi ang pumatay ay hindi naman alagad ng batas. But I may be wrong, and that was one of the questions that I would have wanted to ask the CHR, except that limited talaga ang time sa investigasyon na uubos between Senator De Lima at yung witnesses. Para kasing siya na yung nagpre-present ng witness, siya pa yung nagro-cross-examine, siya pa yung nagpre-present. So, naubusan talaga ng oras lahat ng iba.
Ito naman pong going to still on the issue of human rights. Itong United Nations, lately, they were stepping in dito sa issue sa Pilipinas on the issue of drug war at saka United Nations pumapasok. Human rights din ba ang issue?
Mr. President, may I make that clarification because even in CNN last night, I heard that na sinabi the UN stepped in. It is not true that the UN is stepping in. Kasi pag sinabi mong UN, you're talking about the General Assembly or an official act of the UN. Nag-comment po ang Secretary General nila. Ang problema po, during the time na nag-comment po ang ating Pangulo at nag-comment si Secgen Ban Ki-moon, hindi pa ho administrasyon niya. So yung representative po natin sa UN ay hindi nag-file ng protest. May mga nakausap po ako sa diplomatic corps, pati po sa ambassador, at sabi nila, pag nangyari ito sa bansa nila, automatic yun, magpro-protest sila at hindi sila papayag na sa record. Why? Because wala pa naman investigasyon na hawak si Secgen Ban Ki-moon. Ang hawak niya lang yung news reports at nag-comment na siya. No? Pangalawa po, yung tinatawag pong rapporteur or yung pong sa English reporter. Kaya nga po reporter, sila po ay mag-iimbestiga, then they will report to the UN. And then their report shall be part of the record. Si Alston po ay nag-report talaga, nag-imbestiga. Ito pong mga binabanggit ngayon, hindi pa ho nag-iimbestiga yan. Nagko-comment yan based on the reports. That's why ang aking pakiusap sa ating mga kapatid sa media, madalas sabihin nyo, huwag kaming balat sibuyas, huwag kaming magalit mga politiko, ginagawa lang ang aming trabaho. Ang pakiusap ko sa inyo pabalik, pag ginamit nyo po ang salitang summary killings, extrajudicial killings, vigilante, kill list, etc., please do that. Be sensitive din kasi ang nagbabasa ng dyaryo nyo, ang nanonood ng inyong news report, hindi lang Pilipino, hindi lang sa Pilipinas. Sa abroad, binabasa din. At sa Pilipino, we take it in the common sense meaning, extrajudicial. Pero sa abroad, lalo sa Europe at sa US, pag nabasa ang mga salitang ito, ang dating sa kanila, no, human rights violation. Kaya nag-react yung UN. But there is no official statement or intercession or intervention by the United Nations. And you know, I will be taking that up as chairman of the committee, as our chairman, or your chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations, sapagkat I think our ambassadors and especially our representative of the UN has to be more aggressive in reminding the UN that may kanya-kanya tayong kultura at paraan ng pagsasalita. At tignan nila ang aksyon ng ating Pangulo at ng ating mga kababayan rather than yung the way we talk. Kasi nausok, Mr. President, masyadong politically correct eh. So kumbaga, pag may nasabi kang hindi politically correct, babanatan ka agad ng mga aktivista sa Europe at sa US na hindi naman natin ginagawa yung pabalik sa kanila. So there are things that have to be worked out, Mr. President, and thank you for Majority Leader for bringing that up. But to clarify, no, pag nasa headline natin, UN ganito, UN, parang ako, pag sinabi kong mali ang ginagawa ni Mayor ganito, pag nilagay mo sa dyaryo, Senate censures, Mayor ganito, mali po yun. Dahil si Alan Cayetano lang po yun, isa lang ako sa 24. At kahit po 24 tayong pumirma, pag hindi pa natin in-approve sa plenary, correct, hindi pa po aksyon ng Senado yun.
Correct. Thank you very much. Well, I'm glad you clarified that issue on the United Nations because I almost went into another issue concerning the United Nations and whether just going back to Singapore, one final point, Mr. President. Is there a commission on human rights in Singapore?
Hindi ko po alam, Mr. President, but alam ko na marami silang policies na nag-work, na severely criticized ng human rights advocates at ng sa West, no? At pinipilit yung values ng West sa kanilang bansa. No?
I asked because, for one, I know for a fact that in Singapore, when a person is found to be a drug dependent, confirmed drug dependent, he will undergo rehabilitation and the entire family. Ganun magparehab doon, pati pamilya, rehab. Hindi yung person lang concerned.
Which, Mr. President, is an Asian value. Although Western people love their family. Yung concept natin ng clan ng pamilya, ibang-iba talaga. Number two, Mr. President, hindi po natin sinasabi na hindi importante human rights. Ang sinasabi nga natin, pag ikaw ay sumunod sa batas, dapat walang violation ng batas, ikaw man ay kriminal o pulis. Ang parati lang sinasabi ng ating Pangulo at yung experience nyo po sa CHR, minsan, ginagamit pa ho ng mga kriminal o ginagamit ng gumagawa ng masama yung concept of human rights to shield them from liability or investigation. But we are not saying here that we do not respect human rights. We're not saying here that it's not important. In fact, that's why we put it in our Constitution that meron independent commission on human rights. Ang sinasabi po lang natin, maglagay sila sa ayos. Hindi po yung gagamitin sa politika or they will latch on an idea of a certain interpretation of human rights to the detriment of the whole country.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank the gentleman for yielding to some of my questions. If there is no other member
President,
who wishes
before
to...
that,
Yes.
Majority Leader, may I just emphasize because we often talk about drug dependents or users. Hindi po natin sinasabi na lahat ng users po ay kriminal o nagiging kriminal. In fact po, yung ginagamit ngayon na PNP na 3 million, di ba? Iniiba po natin ang addict sa user. Kasi pag nag-umpisa ka pa lang, user ka pa lang. Addiction, if I'm not mistaken, is a medical term, no? Meron ng certain degree of dependence on drug para maging addict. And then, yung tendency sa criminality, dalawa po yan. One, dati ka ng masama. Talaga lang lumakas ang loob mo sa droga. Or pangalawa, dati kang mabuting tao, pero nasira na ulo sa droga. And that takes time to happen. That's why our President is saying, before it happens, i-rehab na natin ito. And let me clarify that because baka ang dating po sa pamilya ng mahigit 3 milyon na nag-use ng drugs ay walang puso o malasakit ang ating gobyerno o tayo po, Mr. Majority Leader, nagsasalita dito. In fact, baliktad, ang malasakit natin sa kanila. Dahil biktima din naman ang tingin natin sa user. But once they start selling so that they can continue their habit and once they start criminal activity, hindi nila pwedeng sabihin biktima lang sila kasi nang bibiktima na sila eh. At the start, biktima sila. Di ba? So, kung ako na-hold up, araw-araw, wag naman mangyari, naubos pera mo, biktima ka. Pero if I start na mang-hold up din ako para makabawi ako, criminal na rin ako. So, let me put that on record, Mr. President, that, you know, we are not putting in one lump sum or in one category the different kinds of dependencies. No, there's a science for that, and that's why we want more money, more resources, more help to get rid of this addiction, Mr. President.
I thank you for that clarification, Mr. President, because that's also one thing that I'm surprised about, that I wonder why other people don't realize it. Drug testing, they should not be worried about drug testing, Mr. President. Even the CHR before, I keep on telling them, nagdidebate kami nung araw nung DDB chair ako eh. Drug testing, even if you test positive, it doesn't mean you're a drug dependent. You must undergo a confirmatory test before you can be declared a drug dependent. Kaya wag silang matakot sa drug testing. Ewan ko kung bakit kabadong-kabado sila kung pagpapadrug test yung workplace or yung wherever. But of course, you know, the nowadays, you know, the regular drug testing is for marijuana and shabu. But the real drug testing that should be conducted is the 5-assay test, drug test, which includes everything: cocaine, nobain, lahat ng droga. But then again, if you test positive, you must undergo a confirmatory test to prove that you are a drug dependent. Otherwise, you tested positive. That's all.
Mr. President, just a point of information. Singapore has no National Human Rights Commission like the CHR, but they have an interministerial committee that oversees human rights. Second point, Mr. President, it's so interesting every time I listen to Senator Soto about drugs, but that's my point precisely. If the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, no, also took up these other aspects, no? Paano makatulong sa prosecutorial system, paano po ang sa drug dependency, kung tinanong dun sa byuda at sa mga anak na bakit kayo nasa droga, ano bang pwede, okay lang po sa akin eh. Pero para po ba tayong nag-drawing ng target tapos nilagay natin dun sa pula, sa bullseye, si Duterte? Ganun po ang nakikita kong takbo ng committee. But I may be wrong. But ask the public and ask our colleagues, Mr. President. And I don't think it reflects well on the Senate.
Thank you for that information. I think that is a very good idea. We should ponder on a committee in the Parliament, you know, just in case the federalism program of the Senate President and President Duterte work out, and there is a Parliament, you know, the committee on Human Rights could be included in that Parliament, perhaps. Just an idea. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
With the permission of the two gentlemen, can I ask a point of clarification directed at our expert on, what's the title, sir? Expert on drug proliferation,
Drug production eradication.
Sir, at the point when a person is using or enjoying illegal drugs, is he or is he not violating the law?
He is a criminal, Mr. President.
At
That is the problem with this issue.
Okay,
The problem of dangerous drugs. This is the only crime in the world where the criminal is a victim and the victim is a criminal. There is no other such crime.
And then let us say a few days later on, he's tested and he tests positive. At that particular point, he is not violating the law anymore, right?
When he tested positive, he was not.
Yes.
When he was using, he was.
Yes, so that's why there is really nothing to fear about having yourself tested.
Yes.
Because whatever be the result, for as long as when the result comes out, you are not actually using or enjoying illegal drugs, then you are not committing a crime at that particular point.
Correct, precisely. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
President.
Soto.
So with that, Mr. President, I move to refer the privileged speech of the gentleman from Taguig to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Mr. President. And as a matter of fact, I am tempted, no, so I will leave it to the wisdom of the gentleman. I'm tempted to refer it to the Committee on Rules.
I agree with you.
Because he is questioning, the gentleman from Taguig is questioning
Can I contribute my own ideas? I made some notes of from the speech of Senator Cayetano. He asks the question, who should chair the hearing on extrajudicial killings, especially if the chair is decided already? I think that's one of the points raised by Senator Cayetano. He says that the chairman should be neutral. That's why I doubt if the overall substance of the speech is a proper subject matter of the Committee on Public Order. I think it should be more on the Rules Committee.
Sir President,
Ms.
may I thank you and the Majority Leader to be sensitive to this issue, because if you referred it to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, you will be creating an injustice and violating my human rights. Having said that, Mr. President, there is nothing wrong with being biased, prejudiced, in a sense, when you are an advocate here in the Senate. So if I'm biased or for the poor and prejudice against, let's say, oligarchs, and we are creating a we are creating a body to make sure that there is no unlevel playing field, no? Or, for example, Mr. President, if you are a human rights advocate, you of course tend, no, to look beyond the legal and the what's happening in the big picture, and you tend to focus on the human right aspect. I have no problem with that. I'm not saying that Senator De Lima per se is doing anything wrong by focusing on human rights and advocating that. What I'm saying is that it's a deadly combination to be chairman and an advocate at the same time. You have to choose. So if you want to chair that hearing, because Mr. President, at the start of the hearing, she made it clear that they will be following the rules of investigation in aid of legislation. So this is not a hearing, an ordinary hearing of the committee on a certain bill. It's an investigation in aid of legislation. So if you cannot be unbiased in chairing the committee, how will the facts come in? No? And remember, the chairman or chairperson is king or queen in this Senate. But again, Mr. President, I hesitated and thought twice about bringing this up because we can accuse each other in any hearing of this. No? But it is consuming our national media. It is consuming the goodwill of the Philippines in the international media. Instead of ang headline, safe na ang Pilipinas, biyahe na. Di ba? Or, wow Philippines, if I can quote Senator Gordon, or it's more fun in the Philippines, ang nasa headlines, patayan sa Pilipinas, which is not an accurate picture of what is happening in our streets. I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm not saying walang napapatay, pero hindi naman totoo na hindi ka safe sa kalye at sa trabaho mo ngayon. In fact, matatawa ka sa example na to, Mr. President, pero yung sa Pokemon, punta kayo ng Luneta. Kahit gabi, ang dami ng tao kasi they feel safe already. They don't, hindi katulad dati na talagang pag magulang ka at hindi pa nagte-text o wala pa sa bahay mo yung anak mo, nag-aalala ka eh. Ngayon, there's a sense, no, of security that I want to communicate. We want as a Senate to communicate to the rest of the world. So thank you for being sensitive on that point. No?
Thank you, Mr. President. So, let me amend my motion, Mr. President. I move that the privileged speech of the gentleman from Taguig be referred to the Committee on Rules.
There is a motion to refer to the Committee on Rules the speech made by Senator Cayetano. Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to...
Mr. President?
Yes.
Senator
Mr. President, mine is just a quick,
recognized.
it's not an interpolation because I completely agree with the gentleman from Taguig on all his points. Mine is just a manifestation of support that we asked the chairperson of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights to defer the hearing on a later time, on a later date, in support of the President and his trip to the ASEAN Summit. That way we can show unity even if we have different political colors. Let's not destroy the Philippines in that way by coming out with unnecessary hearings. I so move. I mean, that's my manifestation for the record, Mr. President.
Mr. President, just on that point.
Thank you, Senator Subiri.
Mr. President, just on that point, some senators might object, and I don't want to put political color, but if you remember when we handled the budget, we agree that no hearings can be had while we're doing the budget para nakafocus tayong lahat sa budget. So it's a matter of consensus. If we have a consensus that in certain international engagements where the President is with the head of states, we do not conduct hearings that would shed a bad light on the country or the President, then I think it would be a good rule. Remember, we never know when we're in the opposition or in the administration. And I will keep that rule, not only for President Duterte, but for any president. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano.
Mr. President, I move to suspend the session for a few minutes.
Session is suspended for a few minutes.
Oh, padala.
Yung padala.
Session is resumed.
Thank you. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1112 under Committee Report Number 1.
Any objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 1112 under Committee Report Number 1 is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are still in the period of interpellation. Before I move to recognize the sponsor and the chairman of the Committee on Local Government and the minority leader to interpellate, I'd like to acknowledge the guests of Senator Angara in support of the Barangay SK election postponement. We have the COMELEC officers and staff of the Affairs Department, Election Record Statistics Department, the DILG, National Barangay Operations Office, and the Liga ng mga Barangay National President Attorney Edmond Abisamis and Vice Governor Severi Palaez of Misamis Oriental.
Welcome to our guests.
So, Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, Chairman of the Committee on Local Government, Senator Sari Angara, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Ralph Recto.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Senators Angara and Recto are recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our Majority Leader. Would the distinguished gentleman from Aurora in the Philippines yield to a few questions?
Certainly, to the acknowledged Master of Figures in the chamber, Mr. President.
Which type of figures,
the
Mr.
distinguished
President?
figures of all types, Mr. President. The distinguished Minority Leader.
Thank you, thank you. Again, similar to what Senator Lacson said, or the gentleman from Cavite, yesterday in the first interpellation, allow me also to congratulate the Senator from Aurora for being the first to sponsor a bill in the floor. Masipag talaga. Talagang forward at guard ang laro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished Minority Leader.
Natin na taga-Aurora. Thank you for that, Senator Angara. First, Senator Angara, gentleman from Aurora, what are the pertinent provisions in the Constitution which mandate Congress to create a local government structure and provide for the elections of barangay officials?
The general provisions on local government are found, Mr. President, in Article 10. There is a section 1 is pertains to the various territorial and political subdivisions, which include the barangays, and then Section 3 mandates Congress to enact a local government code and to allocate powers, responsibilities, resources to provide for the qualifications, elections, appointment, and removal of local officials, among others, Mr. President.
Yes. And of course, Section 8 in Article 10 as well.
Yes, Section 8 refers to the term of office, which limits to 3 years the terms of elective local officials, with the exception of barangay officials, Mr. President.
And when you say with the exception, that means Congress, and following Section 3, will enact a local government code and provide for the term of office of the barangay officials.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you for that. Is this found in any other of our previous constitutions, Mr. President? Or is it?
I would have to check, ask my staff to check. I'm not so conversant, Mr. President, with the previous...
in the 35 Constitution or the 73 Constitution?
We'll check. Hopefully we can get back to the...
Our research, Mr. President, is that it is only found in the 87 Constitution, which makes it unique in that sense. Now, having said that, are we the only country in the world that has a barangay system and as a basic political unit and allow for youth participation through elections regularly, Mr. President, every 3 years?
Well, I'm told that we are, Mr. President.
So it is unique to Filipinos.
Perhaps, Mr. President.
Okay.
We've not. It would take a true expert to.
Yes.
But for my limited knowledge of political history, I think we are.
Yes. The gentleman has been a congressman for 3 terms. And I am sure he has worked and he knows the functions and responsibilities of barangay officials. And those elected under the SK. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President. Like the gentleman, the distinguished minority leader who was also in Congress for the full the full 3 terms, congressmen kind of straddle the local and the national scene, and there's some exposure to the local politics, especially the barangays.
And I am sure that as a representative of Aurora then, and having relatives in local government positions, you're very much aware of the responsibilities of barangay officials as well.
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, distinguished colleague. There's quite a, in the provinces especially, I think our people are quite reliant on the barangay officials.
Yes. And it's good to have this conversation today because the Senate President today is the son of the author of the Local Government Code.
That's right, Mr. President.
In effect, after the 87 Constitution, it was the time of the former Senate President who was the principal author of the Local Government Code. And this is the first time in our history that you had also, because of the 87 Constitution, ginawang maliwanag yung responsibilidad din ng mga barangay officials. Is that correct?
I think you're correct, Mr. President, because
yes,
that was really one of the goals of the Local Government Code, is really to, along with the devolution of powers, all the way down to trickle those powers down to the very basic level of the barangay.
that is correct. And in fact, there are many, many provisions in the Local Government Code that provide for what type of services the barangay officials should provide their constituency. There is even a section on the role of the barangay, Section 384. Section 387, Chief Officials and Office, yung trabaho ng barangay captain. Halimbawa, maliwanag in the Local Government Code, including, for example, the barangay kagawads. And what is the role, Mr. President, of the barangay captain? What are his functions?
Well, Mr. President, in Section 389 of the Local Government Code, it says that the Purong Barangay, as the chief executive of the barangay government, shall exercise such powers and perform such duties as provided for this code. And it goes on to list, enforce all laws and ordinances, negotiate and sign contracts for and in behalf of the barangay, maintain public order, call and preside over the sessions of the Sanggunian, appoint the barangay treasurer, secretary, other appointive officials, lead emergency groups for maintenance of peace and order or in times of calamity, among others, Mr. President.
At least there are 17 listed here, among others, Mr. President. And you also have the Sangguniang Barangay in Section 390. It talks about the composition, and furthermore in Section 391, the powers and duties and functions of the Sangguniang Barangay. And what is the principal role of the Sangguniang Barangay, Mr. President?
Mr. President, the Sangguniang Barangay is composed of 7 regular members, and they enact ordinances which would be necessary
So legislative in nature.
They are
among
legislative
others.
in nature. Yes, Mr. President. Yes.
They also have quasi-judicial functions, the barangay captain. Is that correct?
The Lupon,
The Lupon.
tagapamayapa, Mr. President,
Correct.
is tasked to settle at the first instance
Correct.
incidents between residents of the barangay.
Correct. And as far as the barangay kagawads are concerned, there are at least 24 functions and responsibilities.
They're quite an extensive
Very
list,
extensive.
which is
well
why
thought of way back then. And it has served us pretty well until today. I am concerned, Mr. President, that there has been talk of appointing barangay captains, appointing or even not to have barangay council members, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I've heard the talk. I've read the reports of some officials speaking of at various turns either abolishing the SK and abolishing the barangay councils as well.
The barangay kagawads.
Yes,
barangay
Mr.
councils,
President.
Mr. President. I wonder what the position of the former Senate President is on this matter and what the thoughts of the incumbent Senate President are with regard to these radical amendments to the Local Government Code that are being proposed, at least on TV.
Mr.
Well, I
President.
too would be curious to hear what the father of the local government code would, and would that make him the son of the local government code, since his father is the father?
Okay. Who I understand is a party mate of the author of the local government code. The officials who have mentioned this, at least on TV.
That's right, that's right.
Yes. So maybe at the appropriate time, we could ask the Senate President what the position is of the PDP Laban in this regard. Having said that, Mr. President, there is also, as I mentioned earlier, a Section 8, Article 10 of the Constitution, which reads, the term of office of elective local officials, except barangay officials, which shall be determined by law, and the law has been created through the local government code, shall be 3 years, etc. Question is, Mr. President, what could have been the intent of the framers of the Constitution after they granted the plenary authority to Congress to fix the term of office of barangay officials?
Mr.
Inisip
President,
ba ng framers of the Constitution na maya-maya we will postpone elections, change their terms of office?
Mr.
Was that
President,
contemplated when the framers of the Constitution put this provision? Or did they expect that members of Congress would be responsible? Meaning to say, after we set the law, once in a while you could probably review the terms of office as we have done before, but to postpone elections on a regular basis, Mr. President, was that the intention of the framers of the Constitution and the author of the local government code? Yes.
I can only venture an educated guess, Mr. President, not having the constitutional records in front of me, but perhaps it was to give Congress flexibility in determining the term of office, since historically the term of office pre-1987 Constitution was 6 years.
Correct.
So maybe when they set the terms of the local government officials to 3 years under the provision quoted by the distinguished minority leader, they would leave it to Congress to whether to decide whether to have it for 3 years or 6 years, as the collective wisdom of Congress would dictate.
But the next point is, did the framers of the Constitution want us to postpone elections regularly as well?
Again, we can only venture to guess, Mr. President, that they left it to the wisdom of the members of both houses to when to schedule the elections and how to shape the system of barangays, given that the authorization or the mandate given to Congress is couched in very general terms, Mr. President.
I submit, Mr. President, that that is not the intention of the framers of the Constitution, because that would provide instability kung lagi tayo nagpo-postpone ng elections, Mr. President. Now, let me move on to that point. How many barangay elections have been conducted since the enactment of Batas Pambansa 222, which provided for the election of barangay captains and councilors on May 17, 1982? Simula nung nagkaroon tayo ng election ng barangay, how many elections have we had?
With the first barangay elections were in 1982. The second was in 1989. The third were in 1994. The fourth barangay elections were in 1997. And the first synchronized barangay and SK elections were held on 2002. So how many total?
So we've had more or less eight barangay elections.
Mr. President, the SK and barangay elections were held separately before.
Correct.
So,
so we've had 8 barangay elections. And how many SK elections have we had? When was the first time we had an SK
The
election?
first SK elections, Mr. President, were held in 1992. The second was in 1996. The third was the first synchronized SK election in 2002. And then we had again in 2007 and 2010 and well, we didn't have them in 2013 because Congress postponed. So
Correct. So how many were the SK
that's
elections?
5, Mr. President,
Five.
by my count. Yes.
Okay. And how many times have we postponed the barangay elections?
Four times for the barangay, Mr. President, and 4 times for the SK elections, Mr. President.
So regularly, we have been postponing barangay and SK elections.
Well, given the history, it would seem so, Mr. President.
And we would want to do the same again today.
Yes, Mr. President.
May I know for the record, what were the reasons for the postponement in the past? The first.
What I can remember, Mr. President, was I was a fresh congressman still it's my first term. It was the 13th Congress, and I was alongside the gentleman from Bulacan, who was on his second term as a congressman, I believe. And the reason then was fiscal.
What year was that?
That was 2005, Mr. President.
The first postponement?
No, this was the most recent postponement.
Yeah, the first postponement. I think it is important for us to review why we postponed these elections in the past.
The first
if there have been 8 postponements, how many postponements again did we have in barangay?
I'm trying to solicit an answer for the first few postponements, Mr. President, and while I'm waiting for that answer, the
first postponement was in 1988.
Yes, Mr. President,
correct?
that's right.
So what were the reasons kaya? Bakit natin pinospone in 1988?
Well, we're still awaiting the answer, but for 2005, the
let's go by it one by one,
Okay.
Mr. President. Let us start in 1988.
In 19... was the first. No, but that's not the reason for postponement. Right now, we don't seem to have the information, Mr. President, as to why they were postponed. We apologize for that, but
no problem. I
yeah.
understand, and thank you for the honesty. If they don't know the reasons for postponing the barangay elections in 1988, it's unfortunate because those who want to have it postponed should explain to us the history. Bakit pinospone? Okay. Nevertheless, in 1989 you had the elections, right? And then 1992 you had the first SK elections after passing the local government code.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. And then in 1994 you had the elections again. And then you had the SK elections.
1994 was
They were separate,
the
so
third
you
barangay
divide.
elections, and
Okay.
in
And then
1996 was the
1997.
second SK election, Mr. President, distinguished
Okay.
colleague.
In 2002, ginawa ng synchronizing election.
Yes, Mr. President.
What were the reasons? Why was it separate in the beginning, and why did they synchronize it in 2002?
Why were they separate? I can only venture a guess again, Mr. President. It's probably because of the different terms of the officials, Mr. President.
And in the beginning, the elections were done during May. And then that was moved to July in 2002.
Mr. President, the records
Today
I
we have it on October, and you're still proposing October next year. Why not back to May, if at all? I mean, it's important to find out why. Bakit yung election din natin ngayon National, Congress, Senate, Presidente, May. Siguro walang klase siguro. Summer. Mga bata.
Actually, that was raised during the hearings,
Correct.
Mr. President. I think it was the president of the Councilors League who said, rather than have them in October, why not have them during the summer? Because they were citing the rainy season.
Especially if
as,
we're concerned about the turnout of
yeah.
voters.
And when they raised that, we threw the question to the body, but the consensus seemed to be that May 2017 would be too soon, while May 2018 would be too late.
Yeah, but the problem is, once we do this, the next election will be when? October 2017. Thereafter will be, assuming we have those elections and it is not postponed again, for other reasons na naman, halimbawa, because we're amending the Constitution.
Mr. President, one possibility that the gentleman has raised with his questions is that subsequent elections could be held in months other than October.
Correct. So why not, why subsequent? Why not May, assuming we agree that we postpone the elections
This representation, Mr. President, is not tied to having the elections in the month of October. It's just for the next postponement. It seems that October 2017 is the most popular, or seems to be the consensus choice among the resource persons during the...
We will get to that later, Mr. President. Who are the resource persons? But okay, let's move on now, Mr. President. So maybe the resource persons of the gentleman, of the committee, could provide this representation the answers to some of those questions. Bakit dati hiwalay ginawang sabay? May dahilan lahat yan. These were all debated in the past. I don't think it will be smart of us to keep on going back and debating the same issues over and over again without understanding what was the debate in the past. What were the reasons, including the change of dates, the months, so on and so forth, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I've been informed that the reason why the elections for the SK and the barangays were held separately was the difference in the term. The barangay officials previously had 5 years, and the SKs had 3 years. So at some point, it was decided that the local government, to pass the local government code, and the terms were 3 years. And so in 2002, we had the first synchronized barangay and SK elections. Perhaps, again, this is just an educated guess on my part, perhaps it's also an issue of expense to have them together, Mr. President.
Yes. In 2007, there was a move in the House to postpone the barangay elections. And that time, the Senate disagreed. And that's why we did not postpone the elections in 2007. What were the reasons for the Senate rejecting the House bill? Bakit hindi pumayag ang Senado nun?
I was not yet a member of the chamber, Mr. President, but perhaps it was because that move to postpone by the House came on the heels of a decision to already postpone in 2005, and perhaps the Senate did not want to postpone a second time. So.
Correct. So the Senate stood its ground in 2007, so to speak.
Yes, but after agreeing, Mr. President, to postpone in 2005.
Yes, but in 2007,
it decided not to postpone anymore.
Yes.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. Okay. Mr. President, the distinguished sponsor mentioned in his sponsorship speech several reasons why the election should be postponed. One is election fatigue. Was the foremost reason cited also by the COMELEC, Chair Andy Bautista, why there is an apparently a clamor to postpone the barangay and SK elections. May I know who has the election fatigue?
I think when that phrase was used by the chair of the COMELEC, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, he was referring to the public, but I think he may have also been referring to the COMELEC, the COMELEC themselves, Mr. President. I would not be surprised.
Alam
because
naman natin na medyo nag-aaway-aaway sila sa loob ng COMELEC.
well, I think that's already been publicly documented, Mr. President.
Correct. And in fact, after the elections, he was the first one to mention about postponing the election fatigue.
Yes, I think he made that right after
when the House and the Senate were not even discussing the issue.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Now, and they're saying that there's election fatigue because why? We just had a national election. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President. He was saying that we had gone through this divisive exercise and sort of the people didn't want to engage in another exercise being so exhausted from a particularly difficult election.
Okay. But in 2007, we also had national elections. And yet we carried on with the barangay and SK elections in 2007. No one was talking about an election fatigue.
That's true, Mr.
You
President.
had a manual system.
That's
then.
true.
You still have a manual system.
Also the
today.
same for 2010, for that matter, Mr. President.
Precisely, and also the same for 2010. So what makes this election different? Bakit ngayon may election fatigue? In 2007, wala. In 2010, wala din naman.
Well, Mr. President, perhaps the circumstances are different. Maybe 2016 is more akin to 2004 or 2005, when the government found itself in 2005 in a fiscal deficit, which the distinguished minority leader helped solve with the passage of very urgent revenue measures. And that was one of the reasons cited for the 2-year deferral of the barangay elections then. In the same way that in 2010, the incoming government's thrust was to combat corruption. Kung walang corrupt, walang mahirap, I remember was the slogan of the then presidential candidate Noynoy Aquino. So I think more in line with his thrust of government was to have the barangay elections. Whereas in 2016, where now we have a president who has been elected on a platform of peace and order and combating drugs and other security threats, it seems to be the prevailing sentiment that postponing the barangay elections would best serve these platforms upon which these candidates were elected, Mr. President.
We'll get to that. So, but not necessarily then election fatigue.
Well, election fatigue, I think, is just one factor among many, Mr. President, that we cited.
I
in
don't
our
think much
speech.
has changed as far as the 2007, 2010 platforms. Yes, I suppose so. And one of those platforms is the war on drugs and corruption today. Isn't that correct? And that was the second issue mentioned. Let me go to that now. That was the second issue mentioned for the postponement of the barangay and SK elections. On the issue that the barangay and SK elections could break the momentum of President Duterte's war against drugs, criminality and corruption, because PNP personnel would have to be deployed to some 36,700 polling precincts. Mr. President, wouldn't their deployment allow our PNP forces to safeguard our barangays even better? Nandun na sila sa barangay. Magbabantay sa kampanya, sa barangay elections. Isabay na yung war on drugs.
Well, that's an interesting thought, Mr. President.
I think it is the opposite.
Yeah.
Now, 94% of barangays in Manila are affected. That is according to PDEA and the Dangerous Drugs Board. How many percent of the barangays nationwide are affected by drugs? Nationwide.
Not Manila, nationwide. I think we would need the help of our distinguished majority leader, who is the drug expert.
Now, let us
Mr.
assume
President.
whether it's 20% to 90% nationwide. Ha? Hindi ba magandang opportunity ngayon magkaroon ng barangay halalan? Now that the issue of the problem of drugs is front and center and corruption is front and center today, na may pagkakataon yung mga botante ngayon at yung mga kakandidato na tumakbo laban sa droga, I'm willing to bet maraming kandidato ang tatakbo laban sa droga, laban sa krimen, laban sa corruption, at yung mga drug-infested barangays na identified, yung mga kapitan, kagawad, and whoever, matatanggal, matatalo sa halalan.
Well, that's an interesting thought, Mr. President. It's quite a novel theory, and I give tribute to the minority leader for coming up with that. But it was the PNP themselves, when they appeared before the committee, who said that they would be distracted if they were asked to perform election duties, which would take somewhere between 45 days.
Yes.
Mr. President.
Maybe we can tell the PNP that the minority leader is providing an alternative thought. And that is the job of the minority anyway, to provide a contrast. At pwedeng gamitin ang halalang ito to wipe out yung mga barangay captains, kagawads, na posibleng involved sa droga. Alam ng barangay yan. Matatalo itong mga to. Front and center ngayon ang issue. Now is the time to have the barangay and SK elections. Now, in fact, during your committee meeting, at least 6 cities, Bais, Bacolod, Candon, Cebu, Kidapawan, and Tarlac, opposed the postponement of the elections because they believe that the incumbent barangay officials are involved in illegal drugs, and holding the elections as scheduled this October 2016 will eliminate these erring officials.
Mr. President, that's correct. The figures cited, I'm just trying to verify if it's 5 or 6 cities, because my admittedly not perfect memory recalls 5 cities out of 100 or so cities comprising the League of Cities of the Philippines, Mr. President.
Okay, and that's why I'm saying that we're better off to continue with the barangay and SK elections. Now let me move to another point. Another reason for the postponement is the savings of 6 billion, at least for the year. But actually, wala naman savings yan because next year gagastusin din natin yan in the next year's budget. And then, in fact, we will be spending more. Why? Because gumastos na yung COMELEC din dito. How much has been spent already of the 6 billion?
63 million, Mr. President.
63 million only.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, kung wala yung elections this year, what will happen to the 6 billion? Because that is not found in the bill.
Well, I've been told it's a continuing appropriation, Mr. President.
That means we should not put it in the JAA anymore.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. President.
Can the COMELEC declare that as savings? No, not yet. But
Not yet,
can
I
the
would hope,
COMELEC
Mr.
declare it as savings? What is the constitutional provision, Mr. President?
Well, the constitutional provision, to my recollection, Mr. President, is that constitutional commissions like the COMELEC, the Civil Service Commission, and the Commission on Audit enjoy some degree of fiscal autonomy, Mr. President.
Okay. So Section 5, Article 9 of the Constitution provides, the Commission shall enjoy fiscal autonomy. Their approved annual appropriation shall be automatically and regularly released. Section 25, Paragraph 5, Article 6 of the Constitution also provides, no law shall be passed authorizing any transfer of appropriations. However, the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the heads of constitutional commissions may by law be authorized to augment any item in the general appropriations law for their respective offices from savings in other items of the respective appropriations. So theoretically, technically speaking, pwedeng i-realign yan ng COMELEC as they have done in the past. Yung mga savings nila. Di ho ba?
It would seem so based on the constitutional
Correct.
provision, Mr. President, and
Correct.
I would not disagree with our colleague who has chaired the Finance Committee for many years.
Correct. So, because the bill is silent on this matter, okay? So,
Where's our amendment?
kung magpo-postpone nga naman tayo ng barangay at SK elections at pinag-uusapan natin yung problema sa droga, pwede ba kayang ilagay natin niya sa drug rehabilitation centers? Mr. President.
I'm not sure, Mr. President, but
Then we can appropriate the 6 billion for the elections next year.
I think that's already
if
within
we are
the
saying that the
ambit of
reason
the-
we are postponing is to fight drugs, and one of the kulang in fighting the drugs is the rehabilitation effort, di ilagay natin sa rehabilitation, sa drug rehab. Walang eleksyon. Anong gagawin natin sa peri? Pwede realign, gamitin kung saan-saan lang. Di ilagay na natin doon, kung sakali. Of course, my initial position is, let us continue the elections, the SK and the barangay elections. Dahil may pagkakataon, may pagbabago sa national. Bakit hindi natin baguhin yung local? People have spoken. They voted for President Duterte because he was strong against corruption, crime, criminality, and the drug problem. So bakit hindi rin ganun sa baba? Mag-eleksyon din tayo sa baba. Tanggalin lahat ng mga barangay captain at yung mga kagawad na involved, posible pinayagan na maging drug-infested yung barangay nila. Di ho ba?
Well, I respect the opinion of the very learned and distinguished minority leader, except that really the consensus during our hearings was to postpone the elections.
Okay. So we already discussed at least 2 issues. Yung election fatigue, na it would appear, ngayon lang may election fatigue. Pangalawa, on the issue of the drug problem, I think this is an opportunity, not a hindrance in combating the drug problem. Now, the third reason is the SK Reform Act. Kapapasa lang nito, nangako tayo last year na maghahalal tayo ng SK ngayon after we pass the SK Reform Act. In fact, I had misgivings on that SK Reform Act. My original position is wag na tayo magkaroon ng SK na halalan. Pero ngayon, pinasa na natin yung batas. Nangako tayo na mag-e-election this year. And we're saying now, one of the reasons that the special registration for the Katipunan ng Kabataan provided for under the SK Reform Act has not yet been implemented. What does the law say with respect to the special registration?
I believe Republic Act 10742, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, says that the special registration to be conducted by the COMELEC should be at least a month. And
the COMELEC failed 15 days lang.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. Now, how many did we expect to register ba?
We expected 6 million according to the COMELEC, but only 3.05 roughly.
Tama pala. Kung ginawang 30 days plus 3 million. So may I know why the COMELEC did it only for 15 days?
At that time. No, let's ask the COMELEC. Why are you debating among yourselves? Ask the COMELEC themselves. Come on. COMELEC. Bakit hindi nyo ginawa yung 30 days?
You know, it is simple, Mr. President. All they had to do is read the law. It said 30 days. But you know, I will get to the numbers later on.
Oh, come on. Yes, come on. What's the answer?
Okay?
I was told lack of time was the answer.
Yeah.
to the question
Lack
of
of time, it will only take them 2 minutes to read that provision, 30 days.
Yes, I'm also in a quandary, Mr. President, as to why they did not
Pwede
comply.
naman sabihin lang sa kanila, kung interesado talaga tayo gumawa ng halalan at wag maghanap ng dahilan, extend it by 15 days. Bakit natin aabalahin yung buong Pilipinas na wag natin gawin yung halalan? Kung ang problema, 15 days lang pala ng COMELEC. Abot pa naman. Now, let me move on to another point. The next point, again on the SK Reform Act, is this 50 million training fund. Is that correct, Mr.
That's
President?
correct, Mr. President. Republic Act 10742 calls for the creation of a training fund worth 50 million to be used for the mandatory training of SK officials.
Kailan ba ite-train yan? Di ba pag nanalo na?
Pag nanalo po, Mr. President.
Oh, wala pang nananalo. Bakit natin problema? Kung 50 million lang, you can get that from how much have we spent of the national budget today? Ang daming pera dyan kung 50 million lang eh. In fact, I don't even know why is that so important. Magkano yung 50 million, you divide it by 42,000 barangays.
It's not it's a bigger amount.
1,189 pesos and 45 centavos. Anong training yun? Sino matitrade mo sa 1,189 pesos per barangay?
Well, Mr. President, that is the amount put forward in the law. Unfortunately, the authors of the law are no longer in the chamber.
Correct.
I would have asked them otherwise.
Yeah, but the point is this. These two are flimsy reasons also why we should not conduct the barangay and SK, as far as I'm concerned. I respect the position of I have high respect for the gentleman from Aurora.
The feeling is mutual, Mr. President.
I have high respect. In fact, I think that in the future he could probably be president of the Philippines as well.
Thank you. Thank you for
I
the
will put him
high praise,
on top
Mr.
of one of my list in the future. But moving to the next point. Ito side issue lang before I get to the main point, Mr. President. How much ang ira ng barangay this year?
I think it was mentioned during the DBCC meeting. It was a little over 500 billion pesos, Mr. President.
Hindi, para sa barangay.
Just for the barangay, I think it's 80 billion. No?
For this year, it's
84. 84 billion, Mr. President.
84 billion. Next year, it will be?
Next year? Next year it will be 97 billion, Mr. President.
97 billion next year. Okay. For the SK, magkano dun sa 84 billion ang para sa SK?
It is 10% of the fund, Mr. President.
10%. So 8.4 billion.
8.4 and 9.7 respectively.
Okay, the next year, 9.7 billion. Kung walang SK election, sino ang gagastos ng perang ito?
It is retained by the barangay, the respective barangays, Mr. President, as a trust fund, and task forces are supposed to use the money for youth development, Mr. President.
Task force. What task force are we talking about?
The IRR of RA 10632 provides for.
So this came from the DILG.
What's the provision of the law?
No, the law says today, di ba? SK mismo ang hahawak ng pondong yan yung 10% eh. Since we did not have the SK elections, may DILG circular which created this youth task force. Di ba? In the previous.
It is the IRR, I was informed, Mr. President. So
Diba?
I believe the gentleman is correct, Mr.
So
President.
DILG yan eh. Is that correct? Okay. So that was that taken up during your committee deliberations? In effect, we're saying that we continue with that practice. Ito yung youth task force na ginawa ng DILG. Nung previous administration, sila pa rin ang gagastos ng pondong ito. Ang mga ngasiwa ng pondong ito. That is the implication.
It would seem so, Mr. President.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Let me move on, Mr. President. Was that the intention pala of the sponsor for this task force to continuously use up these funds, the 10%?
Well, it was not tackled during the committee hearing, yes, to be quite frank, Mr. President, and the sponsor would be happy as long as it was be used for the same purposes or as intended by law, which is to spend it for youth development. So.
Yes. And that's why I'd like to have the SK elections to proceed. So, posible naman na, sige, kung talagang ayaw nyo ng barangay elections, bakit hindi natin tuloy yung SK?
That was discussed, Mr. President, and there were a few resource persons who were of that opinion, that they didn't mind the postponement of the barangay elections, including the National Youth Commission, but they said they had waited a long time for the SK elections already, and they would wish that it would proceed this October, because they were quite excited to participate in the election. But unfortunately, that sentiment was the lone or a minority sentiment among the resource
because
persons.
Of the initial reasons given, like election fatigue, yung war on drugs, yung sa SK, so on and so forth. Okay, the next issue, ban on projects, di ba?
Yes, Mr. President, that was also given. I remember the DILG cited that, as well as some of our colleagues.
Correct. So what is the law governing the ban on public works projects as far as barangay elections are concerned?
Mr. President, it is the Omnibus Election Code, Section 261.
Which says, for the barangay,
there is a general prohibition in national elections.
National elections, yan.
For the prohibition of construction of public works.
But that's for national elections, not barangay. So it is not in the Omnibus Election Code. It is in a different law. In fact,
Republic Act 79,
Mr.
President.
What is the title of that act?
An act to amend Republic Act 6653 to postpone the barangay elections to March 28, 1989.
So there was a rider in that law.
Prescribing additional rules governing the conduct of barangay elections and for other purposes.
Correct. And what does that law say with regard to public works projects?
Mr. President, it says in Section 3, the construction or maintenance of provincial, city, municipal, and barangay-funded roads and bridges shall be prohibited for a period of 10 days immediately preceding
10 days lang.
The date of election. The provisions of Section 261, paragraphs V and W of the Omnibus Election Code to the contrary, notwithstanding.
So, it is governed under that law, not the Omnibus Election Code.
That's correct, Mr. President.
And it's only 10 days. Now, with regard to your committee deliberations, they were citing the Omnibus Election Code.
I think there was a certain degree of confusion, to be frank, Mr. President.
And I'm glad, as minority leader, we're pointing out what the law says.
Full points to the minority leader for knowing his law.
10 days lang.
Yeah.
But can I interject, minority leader?
Yes.
But doesn't that law admit that 261 is Section 261 is applicable?
No.
And precisely that law carves out an exemption?
It is an exception to the general rule, which seems to be that, which is under 261 of the Election Code, which provides for a 45-day period.
Yeah,
but
so
it says, notwithstanding what 261 says, it shall only be for a period of 10 days.
So can we say that it became a 10-day ban because of RA 6679?
Correct.
That's correct,
and
Mr.
without
President.
that, it would be
45 days.
Section 261 of the Omnibus Election Code.
It would seem so, Mr. President.
Is that correct, Minority Leader?
That's how I read it. But the important thing is, hindi tama yung mga dahilan na 45-day election ban. 10 days lang. Now, why can't we just pass a law? Pag barangay election, it is 0 days. Especially for national government projects. Di ba? So walang ban. Now, madami naman exemptions under the law anyway as far as those infrastructure project bans are concerned.
Well, Mr. President, the COMELEC said they would be willing to provide
Correct.
Exemptions for several important projects.
Correct.
Like
Okay.
classrooms, school
So
buildings.
the point is, kung ang problema, yung 10-day period, hindi pala 45, then we can easily pass a resolution or a law
Well, it
and
is-
hold a barangay elections, di ba? I mean, if that is the problem, okay, do it surgically. Why say, wag na tayo magkaroon ng halalan? Apektado yung mga proyekto gagawin ng Pangulo eh. Yun ang pagkaintindi ko.
It seems both the DILG secretary and the COMELEC chair were under the impression that it was a longer period than 10 days,
Correct.
based on their
maliwanag in our
testimonies
records
during
today,
our
it is only 10
hearing.
days.
It would appear so, Mr. President.
Okay. So, and then the ban on appointments, that is found in the election code. That is correct. 30 days. But again, if because of the local barangay elections, we decided in the past, from 45 days going 10 days, why can't we just pass a law also? Pagdating naman ng local barangay elections, wala na yung ban on those appointments. The same argument will apply.
That would certainly make our lives easier, Mr. President.
Hindi ba?
Distinguished colleague.
Okay. So, in effect, all the arguments with regard to postponing the barangay elections, we have pointed out here, are not really reasonable in that respect. Election fatigue, we already had those elections during, in 1 year, national and barangay elections and SK elections. Twice in the past. Thrice, including 2013. You had the barangay elections also. Ngayon lang ginagamit yung election fatigue. But 3 times in the past, wala. Walang fatigue. Pangalawa, on the war on drugs, it is an opportunity, not a hindrance. Third, on the ban on project, or on the 50 million, and on that, on the number of voters. I can get to that next point, no? Okay. Let's take that for the last. And then the ban on appointments and the ban on projects. Hindi 45 days, 10 days, if at all. Not to mention that the COMELEC is willing to provide exemptions, as discussed earlier. Okay, the next point is, who did we invite during the committee deliberations? Who were the stakeholders that we invited?
The various ligas, the League of Provinces of the Philippines, Mr. President, the League of Cities, the League of Municipalities, the League of Barangays, whose president is here today, the National Movement of Young Legislators, the Department of Interior and Local Government, the National Youth Commission, the COMELEC, the PNP, the AFP. There were also some civil society groups. I think the SK Reform Coalition, if I recall correctly, among others, Mr. President.
Okay. So we invited all these leagues. And what were their responses? Did they have a meeting? Halimbawa, League of Governors. How did they come out to say that they are supportive? There are 81 provinces. Did they ask for resolutions from the 81 provinces?
My impression was that they made a head count among the governors, Mr. President, with respect to the League of Governors.
So nagpatawag ba ng meeting yan?
I don't think so, Mr. President.
hindi nagpatawag
I think it was
ng
just a verbal consultation or survey, informal survey among the cities, the provinces, and in the case of the League of Municipalities, I think they had yet to choose some of their officers.
So, what did we expect from the Liga ng Barangay?
We expected strong opposition, Mr. President. Just to be serious, Mr. President, we admit that we did not expect the League of Barangay to present strong opposition to
Did
this
you
measure.
expect the League of Governors to say otherwise?
I think if the League of Governors were composed of a majority of new governors, I think their sentiments would have been to hold the elections, Mr. President, because then perhaps they would not have been alive.
Dating Liga pa. Hindi pa yung bagong
Yes,
election.
yes.
When is the election for the League of Governors pa dapat? After the barangay elections pa dapat? Or is it ongoing now?
I think they just had their election, Mr. President, and the chair ba si Ryan? President. Chairman
And
is
was he the one invited to speak in behalf of the...
Yes, we invited
Ryan
him.
was here.
But he was not here, Mr. President. But he sent he sent the executive director of the.
Do you know what the position is spoken for him, no? The governor of the province of Batangas.
I would just look and consult the gentleman in front of me, Mr. President.
No, the point is, he was speaking for the governors.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, Mr. President.
Did they tell you how many governors were in favor or against? Meron bang official resolution yung kada probinsya? Wala.
They said that there were 3 governors who did not want to have, who did not want to postpone the election.
Why not have elections in those 3 provinces?
Well, that's certainly a novel idea, Mr. President, but perhaps the economies or the economics or efficiencies would not.
Why not?
work out.
Magkano lang yun? Let's say 3 of 81 lang ang may gusto. How much is the budget? 6 billion, di ba?
If we have elections.
Divided by 81 provinces.
Ano ba yung provinces na yan? What are the 3 provinces?
What is the proposal of the minority leader? The idea is that the 3?
Yeah, yung mga gusto mag-election. Eh bakit hihintuin natin?
The
When
3
the law says that we should have elections today. Why not explore these possibilities?
Because of our unitary system, when we pass a law,
But
it's
you know,
either
if
we have elections
Mr.
or we don't
President,
have elections
if
nationwide.
the PDP Laban is serious in moving toward a federal system of
That's
government, we should be taking baby steps already.
Yeah, but
That is the point.
as a lawyer, minority leader, it might be questioned under the Equal Protection Clause. The leading case there is where there was a law which allowed provinces to, I think, appoint the probation officers, and that was struck down by the Supreme Court because there would be provinces where there will be probation officers and there will be provinces without, because it was the decision was delegated to the province and it will be dependent on the finances of the province. So maybe a similar reasoning could strike that proposal down as unconstitutional.
Yeah. Nevertheless, Mr. President, I could point out also later that possibly this could be unconstitutional.
It's on the entire law.
Because we are extending the term
Yeah.
of barangay. In fact, the title of the bill may not be postponing the elections, but extending the term of barangay officials.
Mr. President, if the gentleman will yield regarding his question of the cost of,
Yes.
I've been informed that on the average it would be about 74 million per province.
Yeah, no?
And the 3 provinces who wanted to have the elections were Zamboanga Norte,
Yes.
Kalinga, and Quirino.
That at least we know.
Yeah.
In 3. Because we're not even sure if the other provinces really don't want to have elections. Kasi survey lang eh. Ito maliwanag, may 3 nagsabi, mag-alalan tayo. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. So, Mr. President, it's only 74 million per province. Huh? Now, from what I know, in federal states, they have elections within their state. So, if the PDP Laban is serious in moving toward federalism, you need to take baby steps before you could get there, Mr. President. But okay, so the League of Provinces. What about the League of Cities? Well, we pointed out earlier already.
There are 5 or 6 who did not want to postpone, Mr. President.
Correct. So that sticks out like a sore thumb, because we're not really sure who among them really want to postpone the elections.
Well, there is I've been handed a document, it's a position paper of the League of Cities, where 41 cities support the postponement, Mr. President.
Pero survey lang yan. Hindi naman tinawagan yung mga, hindi naman nag-meeting yung mga yan, nag-aalalan yan. Did they vote on this?
No, I think these are just positions, again, informal surveys of the...
And then it's possible also because the DILG's position is to postpone the elections.
They were influenced.
Naturally, the Liga will say they want the elections postponed.
But I don't discount that point made by the Minority Leader, Mr. President. Could certainly have influenced their decision.
Now, another reason mentioned during the sponsorship speech was the possibility of amending the charter.
Well, just, Mr. President, just in passing, I think we said that in case the administration decided to push through with the initial idea of a constitutional convention, then perhaps we could have the election of delegates at the same time in October 2017. It's just a passing sentence in the sponsorship remarks, Mr. President.
Okay. Okay. Therefore, we're not even sure if we could have the elections next year in October. Because next year, there might be another reason for postponing the barangay elections because of the move for charter change. We cannot assure because today we already have set the elections this year. In fact, we've provided a budget already in the General Appropriations Act. And we're not even sure that that budget maki-carry over next year. Pwedeng gastusin ngayon yan ng COMELEC. Additional MOE, intelligence fund, I don't know. But they're authorized to do that. So instead of 6 billion for the elections, we will have to appropriate again next year. Magiging 12 billion na yun. And then we can also postpone the elections again.
Mr. President, if I may respond to the points raised by the Minority Leader, distinguished Minority Leader. This representation, although I cannot speak for the body, feels quite strongly about having the elections next year. And I would personally state my position that I would oppose any further moves to postpone elections, assuming this measure is passed, Mr. President.
Yes. In 2013, we postponed the SK elections, promising them that we would have elections this year, after the SK Reform Act. It would appear that Congress, again, is not honest with its word and saying, let's postpone it, the elections. Why will our constituents believe that we will do the same next year? Na pangako talaga may halalan na tayo next year ng barangay. Kung sa SK reform, hindi na natin ginawa.
I think the sentiment seems to be to push through with elections next year, Mr. President. Of course, not discounting the possibility raised by the good Minority Leader regarding moves to shift to federalism or to change the charter. But again, I reiterate, this representation stand about feeling strongly about having elections next year, and hopefully, I would think many of our colleagues would also have a similar view and feel strongly, such as Senator Bam Aquino. He raised it during the interpellations that a one-year postponement is the maximum for him, and that should the House of Representatives come up with a version that postpones the election to 2018, he would personally oppose such a measure, and I also assured him that I personally would not take too kindly towards such a measure as well, Mr. President.
Mr. President, is there a real clamor to postpone the barangay and SK elections? Nakonsulta ba natin yung mga botante, yung mga voters themselves? Meron ba tayong voters groups na naimbita sa committee deliberations?
There were a few youth groups who were invited, Mr. President. But
And what was the position of the National Youth Council? Or
the National Youth Commission, through its new chairperson, Aisa Seguera, the former child star, took the position that they were amenable to the postponement of the barangay elections, but because of the events narrated by the minority leader regarding the postponement of the SK elections in 2013 and the promise of having an election this year, they would have wanted to push through with the SK elections. And some of the youth groups also asked for to have echoed the position. They echoed the position to have the SK election, even if the barangay election were to be postponed, Mr. President.
Ituloy pa rin yung SK election.
Tuloy pa rin yung SK, Mr. President. Yes.
So why not have the SK elections at least?
The committee actually, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, considered that seriously. But when we asked and we asked the resource persons when that was suggested, why not have them separately?
And the resource persons are the politicians.
No, the COMELEC actually was one who said that.
COMELEC was the election fatigue.
The COMELEC said that it would cost.
The League of Governors, the League of Mayors, the League of Barangays, what did we expect? All of them, their position, the political class, wag maghalalan. Magastos ang halalan. Yan ang election fatigue. Apparently, it would appear that way.
Well, I don't
Pero yung
again.
National Youth Commission, yung SK na pinangakuan natin, gusto ng halalan, hindi natin pinakinggan. Pinakinggan pero hindi natin pinagbigyan.
Pinakinggan mo, Mr. President. But we had to take into account the positions
Now,
also.
again, the question is there a real clamor? Meron ba nagwe-welda sa kalsada na i-postpone natin ang barangay elections? Pagod na kami.
Mr. President, I don't think it's an issue that elicits that kind of emotional response, Mr. President, that we would have people going to the streets just to say, let's have the elections, or the converse to go to the streets to say, let's not have elections. I think it's not, kumbaga, hindi issue ng bituka, to use the vernacular, Mr. President.
So, wala talagang clamor talaga na i-postpone ang election in that sense. If at all the clamor is coming from the political elite.
Well, certainly, the distinguished minority leader has a point there. It is led by the political elite, but I think they are also speaking on behalf of their constituents, and perhaps echoing some of the sentiments of their constituents.
Yes, two last points, Mr. President. I do not wish to delay the majority if their desire is to postpone the elections. But again, what did we discuss? One is barangay elections, the barangay system, our SK elections is unique to the Filipinos. Unique sa ating saligang batas to. Unique sa atin to. 8 halalan na, 8 postponement na rin. Maya't maya, pinopostpone natin ang halalan. Ha? Dapat itigil na natin yan. Kung may batas na nagsasabing dapat may halalan, ituloy natin yung halalan. Ha? Why is that, Mr. President? Aside from being unique, who benefits from the postponement of the barangay and SK elections? Sino magbebenepisyo? Yan ang huling tanong ko. Who benefits by postponing the barangay election?
Mr. President, regarding the query of the distinguished minority leader, he's referred to the benefits
directly. Who benefits?
I think the general public and the people as a whole benefit, Mr. President, because if the government is indeed successful in, as it has been in the last 2 months, in stamping out drugs, in lowering crime, I believe the crime rate has been lowered by 49%, then I think these benefits can be claimed by the people as a whole, regardless of...
That has nothing to do with postponing the barangay elections. Even if we knew that elections were forthcoming, those crime rates have gone down already.
That's true, Mr. President, but we're making the argument that we need our police, we need our soldiers to be concentrated in their efforts.
Yes, but I've also made the argument that by them being in the barangay, during the barangay elections, hindi lang nila mababantayan yung halalan mismo, pero tuloy-tuloy yung programang yung tokhang. Oh, what is that all about? Is it that going to the barangays?
Yes, it is, Mr. President. It's going down
it is an opportunity
to each residence,
para
actually.
tanggalin natin yung mga erring public officials sa barangay. Front and center ngayon yung usapang war on drugs, crime, and corruption. So I think that there is that opportunity. But having said that, we discussed that earlier, let me put my own answer to the question, who benefits? Maliwanag dito, magbe-benepisyo nito, yung incumbent barangay officials.
Certainly, Mr. President, they would be the immediate, immediate beneficiaries.
They are the ones who will benefit. We are extending their term for 1 more year.
I agree with the distinguished minority.
So sila yung magbe-benepisyo dito. Maliwanag. 1-year extension sila. Ngayon, 3 years ago, nung sila ay inihalal ng taong bayan, ng electorate, ano yung usapan? Ang usapan, 3 taon lang kayo. At pagkatapos, pagdating ng 2016, may pagkakataon yung electorate, natanggalin kayo at bumoto ng iba. Yung term of contract nila, 3 years lang. Tayo ngayon sinasabi natin, gawin natin 4 years. Yung term nila. Pero ang usapan maliwanag, 3 years lang. Now, ilan ba ang boboto sa barangay elections? If I'm not mistaken, there are 55 million voters. Is that correct? So sino ang magbebenepisyo? Yung incumbent barangay officials? Ilan yan? 8 times 42,000, more or less?
Mr. President, there are, in response to the first query of the distinguished minority leader, there are 55,789,000 barangay voters.
Yeah. So, ilan yung magbebenepisyo ng extension of term? Tama ho ba yan? Round off na natin. 43,000 times 8 who will benefit. So less than 400,000.
Total of that, all 4. The total number is 672,576, Mr. President.
Ang magbebenepisyo. Marami dyan, drug-infested yung barangay nila. Parang hindi nila nagawa yung kanilang tungkulin. At pahabain pa natin ng 1 taon yung trabaho nila. Vis-a-vis, sino yung natalo? Ilan yung boboto sa barangay dapat? 55 million?
55 million, Mr. President, distinguished colleague.
Na inaasahan na magkakaroon ng halalan sa October 2016. Tapos, ilan yung 15 to 30 ang boboto sa SK sana?
Sa SK, Mr. President, it is, tama ba to? 21,698,000, Mr. President.
21 million.
Yeah.
Ilan yung nakarehistro? Ilan ba yung hindi nakarehistro nga pala? So, you had this registration for 15 days, basically for 15 to 18. Ilan yung inasahan natin doon?
6 million, Mr. President.
Ilan yung nagrehistro?
A little over 3 million.
A little over
Mr.
3 million. So kung ginawa mong 30 days, kuha mo yung 6 million. So, ilan ngayon yung potential voters ng SK? 18 or 21?
Well, the figure from COMELEC is 21.6 million, Mr. President.
Ang registered ngayon?
Yes, Mr. President.
So inaasahan ninyo dapat 24 million.
The 21 already includes the 3 million who registered, Mr. President.
Correct. Okay. So you're disenfranchising 21 million. Kahit na sabihin natin yung 3 million hindi nakarehistro dahil hindi nila ginawa yung tungkulin lang na 30 days, ginawa 15 lang eh. Right? So yung 21 million hindi makakaboto ng kinatawan nila. Yan para sa akin ang maliwanag na talo. At pinangakuan natin 3 years ago na may halalan sa taong ito. Would the gentleman from Aurora agree with that?
Perhaps it's a strong statement coming from the... I agree with 99.9 of the things the distinguished minority leader says, but I feel they're not really losers here because their right has not been cancelled. It's just merely been postponed, Mr. President, for a few months.
Well, Mr. President, I promise the Senate President that I will not take too long in my interpolation today, but I wanted to put on record at least my sentiments on this bill, and I don't take it against the chairman of the committee, of the local government committee. He probably is echoing the position of the administration on this matter. I'm sure that his heart is in the right place, and I congratulate the gentleman for standing up and proposing this measure and being the first to propose the measure in this August chamber, and for answering the questions that I've asked, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the distinguished minority leader for testing to the limit the faculties of this representation and conducting his very thorough representation. We appreciate his thoughts and ideas very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Recto, for providing us with a different perspective, and we learned a lot from the interpellation. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, in as much as a point I wanted to ask has already been raised by the Minority Leader, I move to terminate the period of interpellation. There are no other senators who have expressed their desire to interpellate.
Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, ready ka sa committee amendments?
Wala sa committee report, individual.
Saan yung committee report? We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Committee.
Tapos, sara ko lang yung committee na individual. Diba? Parang hindi debatehin yun. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of committee amendments on Senate Bill 1112.
Any objection? Hearing none, the period for committee amendments for Senate Bill number 1112 is hereby opened.
Move to recognize the sponsor, Mr. President, Senator Sani Angara.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. We have 4 amendments from the committee, some which came from our colleagues, actually. The first, regarding the date of the elections. Mr. President, the leaders of the House have asked us to consider changing the date of elections from the last Monday of October 2017, or October 30, to the 4th Monday of October 2017, or October 23. The reason being that October 30 was seen to be close to the observance of All Saints' Day. So a practical reason, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. So on page 1, line 10, section 1, we would replace the word last with the word 4th, such that lines 9 to 13 shall now read, provided that the barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections on October 31, 2016 shall be postponed to the 4th Monday of October 2017. Subsequent synchronized barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections shall be held every 3 years thereafter. So move, Mr. President.
Any objections? Senator Recto is recognized.
Just a parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President. For example, I would like to propose an amendment. When is the appropriate time for me to do that? For example, because they're discussing a very important issue in this bill, the date. Kung 4th Monday of October, and let's say my proposal or the minority proposal will be second Monday of May, as we discussed earlier.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
inasmuch as this is not a substitute bill, he
It
can
is,
propose. It is?
It is, that's why
It is a
my
substitute
attention was
bill.
just called now. It is a substitute bill.
Therefore,
Hence, we have to change the period we are in.
oh, yes, we will have to go into a period of individual amendments,
Yes.
Mr. President, in that
So,
case.
so you know, the question I was asking is that when is the appropriate time? Because are my rights stopped later on? Because
No.
there is already amendments being proposed.
No,
From
Mr.
October
President.
to the fourth Monday of October.
The tradition in the olden times, is that we amend per line when the entire body is here, even if it is the period of individual amendments. That is the proper way to do it. So, if there is an issue here on because I did not know, I will have to confess, I did not know it was a substitute bill. In that case, then we will have to withdraw
Yes.
or not continue with the period of committee amendments, but instead open the period of individual amendments.
We will fix the parliamentary situation, Minority Leaders.
Well,
we
in
made,
that
we
case,
made a
Mr.
mistake. Yeah. So, there is a motion?
Well, yes,
I'm
Mr.
willing to
President.
withdraw, Mr. President, if we want to follow that procedure and do the individual amendments first, Mr. President.
No,
the
there
reason
will
we're-
only be one, it will only be individual amendments. There will
Yes.
be no longer be committee amendments.
I see.
Your amendments will have to be treated as individual amendments because it is a substitute bill. So, in that case, Mr. President, I move to reconsider the period of committee amendments.
There's a motion now to reconsider our earlier approval to open the period for committee amendments. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion for reconsideration is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of individual amendments.
For the reason that Senate Bill number 1112 is a substitute bill, the motion is now to open the period for individual amendments. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Right, Mr. President, before I ask that Senator Angara, the sponsor, be recognized, we will have to make sure that there are no anterior amendments to his amendments. So may we ask from the Minority Leader if he has other amendments other than what the sponsor is proposing? May I have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session is suspended.
All right, Dave. We ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, because of possible intricacies in one or two of the wordings that we would want in Section 1, Section 2, and the title, it is best that we take it up on Monday when we are fully prepared, that para wala namang masabing inapura natin.
Yes, sir.
Itong Senate Bill 1112. So with that, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1112.
There is a motion to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1112. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 5, 2016.
Is there any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 5, 2016.